Well, the Warrior Next Door has something relatively unique on tap for your enjoyment today. At least we hope you enjoy it. This series is going to feature Julius Ernst Jakob, who was a Czechoslovakian German who lived in the Sudatenland, which was the German-speaking portion of Czechoslovakia prior to World War II. Julius served in the Czechoslovakian army, the German Wehrmacht, was a POW for the Americans, the Canadians, the British. It would ultimately end up back in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I had a chance to interview him years ago. So buckle up, because this is a very unique story.
All right. Welcome back to all of our very awesome listeners out there in podcast world. My name is Ryan Fairfield. I'm here with the one and only Tony Lupo.
Okay.
You know how every once in a while you're like glad that, nobody comes and visits you, and you're like, it's nice just to have my place to myself. Well, I can't say that this weekend. Okay. Tony is here. Thank goodness we have Tony and his family here in town. We are back in the saddle at the Green Barn doing a recording, a very rare recording, because we don't do this as much as we used to.
No, not live.
Not live. And, we've been doing things on Zoom remotely, him from Denver, me from Tulsa. And it's worked out great. And it obviously saves us money and time to have to travel back and forth, and scramble the whole weekend to get 5-6 series recorded.
Plus, I drink all your beer.
He drinks all my beer.
So it saves a lot of money not having me here.
Yeah. Although Tony now drinks wine, so he's kind of food.
That's even more expensive.
I'll just get Mad Dog, and then that should
call it wine. It's purple, right?
That's right. No, anyway, so we're here today. We've got another great, really awesome series to share with you guys. One of the things that I think has been one of our more popular series that we did was Marta Warner. She was a Hitler Youth, a girl that grew up in Germany and, experienced the rise of Adolf Hitler and how it impacted her family, how it impacted her town and of course her country, and ultimately her life too. She survived the war, obviously, because we were able to interview her, but her story was completely fascinating because it was someone who experienced, as I said before, the business end of the war. We look at it from our perspective as Americans or the Allies, and we look at it like, well, we bombed all the cities and, we did all these things and we were too powerful. But how was it for those people who were on the inside and on the receiving end of all that? Well, today we have a German soldier who served in the German army. His name is Julius Ernst Jakob.
Doesn't exactly roll off the American tongue.
I had to turn and look.
You have to, and I don't blame you. It's not like Bill Sims like we had in a previous episode.
That's true.
This is a Central European dude with a Central European name.
Yes, and before we start, I want to say this. We're trying to say this more. If you want to see the video in its uncut form, go to our YouTube channel or go to the Library of Congress and search. Actually, is he in the Library of Congress?
No, he is not, because he's not a U.S. citizen or an American soldier.
So you're not able to view this on the Library of Congress website because he's not a U.S. citizen. But you can view it on our YouTube channel
and our website.
WarriorNextDoor.com. Website. Yeah. Tony's done a great job, as we've said before, putting that website together and putting a lot of information on each page dedicated to each veteran. So with that being said, if you don't want to hear Tony and I chime on and on about the stuff and add our 2 cents to everything, we understand. But you can go check it out in its entirety, uncut, on YouTube or on our website. But today, let's get into this. Tony, how did you meet this guy, a former German soldier from World War II? And just tell me how this whole thing materialized.
Red Lobster. My sister was part of COVID, a server, a waitress at Red Lobster. And this cute older couple, actually 3 of them came in. They were all in their 80s at the time. This was 2008. They came in and they always requested, my sister's name is Shelly. They always requested her for the server. They had a really good rapport. And Shelly started getting to know them a little better, and they have an accent, like it sounded German to her. And so she asked them about it, and they told her that they were originally from Czechoslovakia. And one thing led to another, and Shelly learned that one of them, the person that I had a chance to interview in Comstock Park, Michigan on July 22nd, 2008, because of my lovely sister Shelly, this Mr. Julius Ernst Jakob was a German Sudatenland Czech who lived in the Czech Republic prior to World War II. And then during World War II, a series of events, which we'll unpack in more detail later, caused him to be conscripted into the German army, where he would fight using artillery on the Western Front, on the Atlantic Wall, and then ultimately become a POW. So,
and that's something that it, for me, is hard to grasp. As Nazi Germany's influence spread out across Europe, I always thought, how did Germany produce all of these soldiers to be able to hold this land and fight on all these different fronts? And it's because of people like Julius that were pulled in against their will,
yes,
really, to fight. And how did the German military keep these guys in line?
Amen. And not only that, you had men who spoke different languages, different cultures. The German military during World War II was a lot like the Roman Empire back in the day, where they had a lot of mercenary troops, a lot of troops that either weren't from Rome originally, but were aligned with the Roman ideal and their ethos and joined the Roman legions, like the Visigoths would later in the time of the Roman Empire, as an example. Well, the Germans did that as well. They had Poles, they had Czechs, they had Ukrainians, they had Norwegians, they had people from all across the newly conquered annexed terrain fighting for them. And I think what's really unique about the story we're going to share today is I think a lot of Americans, when they think about World War II and fighting the Germans, we think about Germany going into Poland, which caused England and France to declare war on them. And then Germany goes in and clears out France and then heads east and goes into Russia. And then the Americans join the war effort later and ultimately defeat them. What we don't spend a lot of time talking about understanding was from 1936 until 1939 and 40, when World War II started as a proper hot war, there was a whole series of political maneuvering and annexations that Hitler oversaw to help assuage and help really act as retribution for what they felt like was an overly harsh terms from the Versailles Treaty in World War One, to take back lands and to bring German people back into the fold of Greater Germania. Mm-hmm. And you see that being used in a lot of other places around the world. Look at Russia and Ukraine, for example. Russia's pretense to go into Ukraine was there's a bunch of Russians living in Eastern Ukraine. We're going to go there to liberate them. Well, it didn't work out too well, or hasn't worked out too well for Russia so far. Turns
Taking
out
a bit longer.
And not only that, a lot of those quote unquote Russians in those Eastern provinces didn't really want to be liberated.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened in this case, but at a much different scale. So I think we're not going to really be able to share a lot of stories about, hard hitting, close quarter combat. But what this is going to provide is a unique first person account of how Germany paved the road that led to the largest war in human history.
So it's kind of a big picture sort of overview of the context of things.
Absolutely. You're going to get a European perspective from a country that was gobbled up by the Nazi regime, was forced to fight for the German army, did not want to do it, ultimately became a POW. And because of his experience as a POW, became a United States citizen. You're going to hear him talk about all of that in this interview. So it's a really radical departure, I would say. We only have a handful of interviews from people who were in Europe. In this case, we don't have anyone from Japan, who fought either for European armies or for the German army, or were civilians during this time, like Martha Warner. We hope that people appreciate how difficult it is to source material like this, and maybe learn a little bit about what does the path to destruction look like. And it turns out to be death by 1,000 cuts, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
All right. Well, I think that's a great setup here. Let's go ahead and dive into Mr. Jakob's interview here, and I've got a series of clips that we're going to be playing as we always do. And we'll get it going right now.
Well, I was born in a very nice town named Liechtenstadt, and it's very close to a world famous spa, Karlsbad.
Okay.
And in Liechtenstadt was a town there just, when you grew up, there was no work because there are 2,000 population and there was just no work. There was one factory in Germany and it was they produced machinery
Mm.
and was waiting. Then after that, if I could not uh, get ahead in things in my hometown, I went to Germany.
Liechtenstadt isn't even on the map anymore. It's in the northwestern edge of what is now the Czech Republic. It is now called Hroznět, and it's Hroz. I can't even spell it, but Hroznět is the town that he grew up in. It has about 2,000 people in it today. It's in the rural mountainous rind or rim that encompasses the northern, western, and southern boundary of Czechoslovakia. Once you get out of this mountainous area, you go more into the plains, and that's where the industrial heartland of what would become Czechoslovakia was. And you heard him talking about being unemployed. So he, like many of the veterans that we've interviewed during World War II, suffered through the Great Depression. We've had a chance to talk about what that looked like from a variety of perspectives in the United States, but Europeans suffered in the Great Depression as well. And from my research, it turns out that the Sudatenland, which we're going to talk about a little bit more after the next clip, this area, this mountainous rim around the northern, western, and southern portion of Czechoslovakia was particularly hard hit by the Great Depression because it was not a heavy industrial area. They were known for producing something called forest glass, which was a utilitarian, think of it as like Tupperware. Think of it as like very utilitarian sort of glasses or cups or mugs we use today. There's nothing fancy about it, but it was made in prodigious amounts and it was cheap. And the demand for those sorts of things dropped during the Great Depression. They also made toys. It was a big place where toys were made for like Christmas and whatnot. So a common theme you're going to hear in these early clips is how difficult it was for Julius to find work. And that was common in a lot of places in and around the Nazi regime, which allowed them to have a foothold or to develop a foothold in all these countries where unemployment was high, crime rate was high. A lot of these people who weren't necessarily Nazis and weren't necessarily German, like Germans, but German speaking people who for a variety of reasons were living in other countries around Germany, primarily because of what happened after World War I, ultimately embraced the Nazi vision because Germany was one of the few countries to come out of the Great Depression very quickly and very strong. And so did Italy. And that's why these fascist governments was seen as maybe a new idea, a new way to govern that would allow people to be secure and also have unemployment. So this weakness, this people not having jobs, is one of those 1,000 cuts I mentioned that happen over time that leads to a totalitarian regime being able to get a foothold here. And that's what he's talking. So here we are. We're in a small town. He's can't find a job, and he's kind of stuck in this world where he's a German in this country that was cobbled together after World War One.
So for anyone out there listening that is thinking, Czechoslovakia, and that, I mean, today on my map, there's no Czechoslovakia, and you think about this, you had Czechoslovakia before World War II, then it was annexed by Germany. Okay. And then after the war, the Soviet Union took over and absorbed Czechoslovakia, became part of the Soviet Union. Then the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it became, all these republics started breaking off.
Mm-hmm.
and now it's the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Exactly. And it's not Czechoslovakia. And in fact, he's going to talk a bit more about that in the next clip. And I'm going to share with the audience a bit more about the history of the Czech Republic and how it became this thing called Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
Yep.
But in the meantime, I was drafted when I grew up with 22 years. I was drafted to the Czech army.
And do you remember what year it was when you were drafted?
That was 32 to 34. And a doctor examined you if you are able to serve in the army. So I was actually twice deferred, thanks to my father. But the third time, I had to go to the army, right? I was in Luchenitz with the artillery. From there, when I came home, since I found no work, I went to Germany, something looking for. First, I went to a company in Leipzig, and then I went back because I did not like the job. And then I was drafted again, and it was at a later time. Actually, the Second World War was started already. I was drafted to the Czech army, and we were sent down to the Slovakia. And I later found out that actually we were all Germans, German-speaking people, that we were more or less prisoners.
Basically, what he described right there is, like we mentioned earlier, Great Depression, couldn't find work, went into Germany, tried to find work there, wasn't particularly successful, came back to Czechoslovakia, and then he intimates about this German annexation, which we're going to talk about more in the next clip, and that he ultimately, because he was a German in Czechoslovakia, the Germans were seen with great suspicion. And so they were sequestered by Czechoslovakia because they did not want this, this hidden front, this enemy from within taking over their country. They were concerned about that. And they had a right to be concerned about that. But let's just unpack a little bit about Czechoslovakia.
Let me jump in real quick before you get into that. I just want to say, with World War I and with World War II, you see this commonality of it being a powder keg.
Oh, absolutely.
You see all these different countries speaking different languages, and as soon as one starts to throw their elbows out, everybody else around them is like, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
And everyone starts getting suspicious, and you start getting into this pressure cooker, and you're seeing it here, like you said, with the Czechs, looking at him suspiciously.
Totally. And the European is, they're by its very nature, how it devolved after, well, even before the Roman Empire, you had the Celts and various tribes there, then the Roman Empire, then it fell apart. It was very tribal. I remember visiting Burton in Belgium, and he was saying, look, there's really two primary populations here. You got the Flemish to the east, which are more Dutch-like, and the Walloons to the west, which are more French-like, and neither one of them like each other. Both of them want us to see. They both want their own country, and that's in Belgium, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you move further east, like in Czechoslovakia and the old Austria-Hungarian Empire, and it's even worse. And so this area, Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, this area just to the east of present-day Germany, was known and named since Roman times. And in fact, it had been settled as its own kind of tribal entity back in the 7th century by a series of Slavic peoples. And the area in Czechoslovakia started to incorporate what would become or known as Germans in the Sudatenland around it. And what Sudeten, quite frankly, means It's a word meaning land and country. And this around the Sudeten Mountains, which are the mountainous regions that are on the border of the modern day Czech Republic. So Sudetenland is nothing more than the mountain people of the Sudeten Mountains. That's it. And they happen to be German. And the reason that they were German is because in the 13th century, which isn't terribly long ago, the 1200s, the Bohemian kings were trying to get additional people into their area for the workforce, for warriors and whatnot. And they actively recruited and brought in Germans. Said, hey, you know, if you guys want to be, it's kind of like, remember what Mexico did with the United States when citizens came down to Mexico and Mexico said, you can settle our lands in northern Mexico territory, which is Texas at the time, because we don't have enough people there and we want to develop it. We want to make it proper. And then what ended up happening was the Texans revolted and ended up taking the land. Well, that would kind of be what happened here, but at a different scale. So the Germans were brought in, and the amount of Germans that ultimately occupied this area by 1921 was by 1921, there was over 3 million native Germans living in the Sudetenland and in Czechoslovakia. That was almost a quarter of the entire population of Czechoslovakia were these Germans. So they were a very large majority. Well, how did Czechoslovakia become a thing? We just told you how the Bohemian area was an ancient kingdom for many years. It became Czechoslovakia after World War I with the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And for people who may not know this, the Austria-Hungarian Empire was a powerful empire that became progressively weaker prior to World War I, and then was completely dismantled after World War I. And it was an aggregation of, gosh, a couple of dozen different countries, including Czechoslovakia. So after the World War I, during the Treaty of Versailles, the victors, people like the United States and France and England, all had to work out, hey, what are these new boundaries going to look like? And the Czechoslovakian area was named dependent in October 1918. And it was supported by most of the allies at the time. They felt like having Czechoslovakia be named that there and being in this area made a lot of sense. At the end of the day, with the boundaries that were drawn, the German-speaking parts of the former lands of the Bohemian Crown were to be part of this new country. This new country is a multi-ethnic state. It included Czechs, Germans, Slovaks, Hungarians, Poles, Ruthenians. That sounds like a powder keg, Ryan, which was what you just mentioned, when you have all these people working in close proximity. But even Archibald Coolidge, which was the ambassador for President Wilson, when he was in Czechoslovakia, this ambassador Coolidge insisted on respecting the German rights to self-determination and uniting all German-speaking areas with either Germany or Austria. He didn't want a bunch of Germans being displaced in a bunch of these countries because he knew it'd be a powder keg, with the exception of Northern Bohemia, which is the Sudetenland. That was an area where he felt like that could be a place where Germans could be settled harmoniously. And unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case at all. So what would happen is after World War I, you had Czechoslovakia, you had 24% of the population that was in this Sudeten area. And then you had an emerging, as you go in the 1930s, Nazi Germany that had its eye on all this land that was taken from them after World War I. And we're going to get into that in the next clip because it's going to create what's called the Sudeten crisis. It's going to be one of about 5 or 6 things that occurred in the late 1930s that led up to World War II. And Julius was right in the middle of all of it.
After several weeks, we were released from there. They sent us by train to in the area of first in the area of Prague. There we went again by buses to a city in Czechoslovakia, it's Kárden. Mm-hmm. And we were told if we walk half a kilometer, we will be comforted by the German army.
Let me take a time out. So what you're telling me is that when Germany and Czechoslovakia,
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily go to war, but there was a territorial dispute
Yes,
that between the two that the Germans actually won.
correct.
You're saying that the Czechoslovakian army took preferentially the German-speaking Czechoslovakian soldiers and shipped them back to Germany. Is that correct?
Yes.
To the German army.
Yeah.
What were you guys thinking when this was occurring? Were you guys disappointed? Were you upset? What was your feeling?
Actually, I was glad to be free again.
Okay.
And then these German soldiers were very friendly to us.
Mhm.
And after all, we could go home again in our hometown. And there we actually found out a part of it, what was going on in Germany, which we did not even believe.
So this is interesting. What he didn't say was, oh, I was a big supporter of the Nazi Party. I was really happy that they were there. And that did happen in his instance because he was basically a prisoner in his own country that he grew up in as a Czechoslovakian. That's all he knew. Remember, this happened in 1918. I mean, just shortly after he was born. That he was just happy to not be a prisoner in his own country again, to be able to just get out of there. But how did this happen? I'm going to try to wrap this up as succinctly as I can. There was a series of annexations that occurred that were driven by Hitler's desire to reincorporate all the wrongs that occurred, after the Versailles Treaty. In March of 1936, Germany marched into the Rhineland, which became French territory after World War I. Even though historically it was German territory, it was a buffer zone. In fact, a lot of these were buffer zones designed by the Versailles Treaty to give the Allies more time if German reemerged as a power again and started conquering territory, to give them time to kind of get their forces together. So they went into March 1936, went in the Rhineland. No shot was fired, and that encouraged Hitler to engage in what's called the Anschluss. That was the annexation of Austria,
Right.
his home country,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a lot of Germans in it, and a lot of German-speaking people. And that's the theme with all of this: is we're just taking our Germanness back. The Rhineland, bunch of Germans, Austria. The Anschluss of Austria really was the catalyst to trigger the Sudeten crisis. Because once he had Austria, he's like, well, we also have, 3 million German Jews living in this made up country, as he would say, called Czechoslovakia. So he basically had an ultimatum. He told Czechoslovakia, you got X number of days to allow us to enter these borderlands, or we're going to come and invade your country. Well, this freaked out the English, Neville Chamberlain, the French Prime Minister, Daladier, I think is who it was at the time. And so they met with Hitler. And this became what was called the Munich crisis of September 1938, which was, hey, what, Hitler, just tell us what you want. We'll just give it to you if it's acceptable, and let's just end all this. We don't need another world war. Okay. Yeah, you're upset. Maybe the terms of the Versailles Treaty were too harsh. Fine. What do you want? And Hitler said, look, all I want is the Sudetenland. I want that back. Once I have that, all of my territorial gains will be met. Everything is even, Steven. We're good to go. And so they signed the agreement without the Czechoslovakian government even in the room. It would be like today, us signing a peace treaty with Russia over Ukraine, giving them a bunch of Ukrainian territory and not having Zelensky in the room. Right. It was that much of an affront, and it caused this really interesting reaction. On the English and French side, when he came home, of course, it was seen as peace in our time. We'd call it appeasement now, which is not good. But at the time, it was seen as this is the righteous path forward. The Czechoslovakian prime minister, I think his last name was Benes, he was actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because he did not fight it because he allowed his country to be taken. He basically, by succumbing to that will, people thought you're thinking of the greater good. You stopped another war. Well, the problem with all of that is 3 months later, just 3 months after that was signed, Germany would march into Czechoslovakia and take all of it.
You know, and what's interesting, you mentioned, you know, Ukraine, the common thing, the current events going on with Russia and Ukraine. Remember when Russia invaded Ukraine? What was the first one of the things they were saying to justify it?
We have all the Russians there, and the Ukrainian is encroaching upon our territory.
And there's a lot of Nazis over there.
Oh yeah, oh
Remember
my,
that?
they're still saying that.
Yeah, right. So it's just interesting how all of these old, you know, events, feelings, is still bubbling up, is still coming to the surface,
Yes.
and just being used for justification. I mean, is that part of the world ever going to be settled in a way that you're not going to have to worry about these sorts of incursions of Germany and Russia or whoever across into these other borders? I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
That it's been, you know, for now, what, 80 years,
Yes.
it's been fairly quiet.
And there's trench warfare in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
right,
who would have
that's
thought
true.
that kind of warfare would occur and this would happen? And so really what this speaks to, Ryan, is something that you and I have talked about a lot with this podcast. You know, if you're listening to this podcast and you really are interested in World War II and a history of World War II, well, guess what? So are we. And
Mhm.
it's really fascinating just to study that. But the other thing that I think you and I find just as fascinating outside of the actual history, the event that occurred during this period of history, is how much of it is still, how much of it, there was a bunch of precursors to this that led up to it. There's connection of history, and it's still there today. I
It's
mean,
the aftershocks.
absolutely. I mean, and you know, and so what would happen is you had Czechoslovakia after World War I. It was a country that was made up in whole cloth after the Versailles Treaty. Germany came in, took over a portion of it, annexed the rest, and then after World War II, you're right, these tribes would break apart again. Czechoslovakia, the Slovaks were like, we're not Bohemian, we're not part of the Czech Republic, and now they got their own sort of thing. And it's interesting because Slovakia leans more towards Russia, and Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic leans more towards the European Union. All these things are just, there's echoes. They just keep echoing. They never go away. And so here we find ourselves in a very interesting place. Some of the research that I've done shows that the vast majority of the middle class in Czechoslovakia, which is what Julius would have been a part of, believe it or not, even though he was unemployed. His dad was a high-level civic leader in the Sudatenland, were against the Nazi regime, generally speaking. They saw it as bad for their business. They saw as an ideology they didn't necessarily agree with. And it caused inflation to occur when this much larger country with a lot of money came into their country and caused a lot of problems economically. For the less affluent Czechs who are really struggling with unemployment and whatnot, they embraced it. It would be dishonest to say that the vast majority of Czechoslovakians did not support the Nazi takeover of Czechoslovakia. They were caught up in history. They felt like they were more German than Czechoslovakia. And many Czechoslovakians, German Czechs, actively signed up for the German Wehrmacht. That would not be Julius's path. He did not sign up for the Wehrmacht, as he said in that previous clip, and he's going to talk about more in the subsequent clip. He was conscripted. He was brought in because of his skills. He had a special skill set in the military, and he would get pulled in. He would get sucked in, not actively, happily joining along this unbelievable period of destruction. And that's what we're going to start talking about next.
After several weeks, we were released from there. They sent us by train to in the area of first in the area of Prague. There we went again by buses to a city in Czechoslovakia, it's Kárden. Mm-hmm. And we were told if we walk a half a kilometer, we will be comforted by the German army.
Let me take a time out. So what you're telling me is that when Germany and Czechoslovakia,
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily go to war, but there was a territorial dispute
Yes.
that between the two that the Germans actually won.
Correct.
You're saying that the Czechoslovakian army took preferentially the German-speaking Czechoslovakian soldiers and shipped them back to Germany. Is that correct?
Yes.
To the German army.
Yeah.
What were you guys thinking when this was occurring? Were you guys disappointed? Were you upset? What was your feeling?
Actually, I was glad to be free again.
Okay.
And then these German soldiers were very friendly to us.
Mm-hmm.
And after all, we could go home again in our hometown. And there we actually found out a part of it, what was going on in Germany, which we did not even believe.
Yeah.
So I got a question, Tony. I'm a little confused. So, he's a Czech guy, right? He was born in
He's a
Czechoslovakia.
German, Sudeten, Czechoslovakian, because after World War I, the Czechoslovakian state included that area around Czechoslovakia that was traditionally German, but he was born and raised Czechoslovakian.
So what did he mean by he was free again?
That's a great question. So what happened is in October of 1938. So this is when Germany was making all these territorial demands on places like the Rhineland in France and Austria, which they annexed, and then the Sudetenland in 1938. This ring of German-occupied Czechoslovakia. The whole Munich peace agreement was supposed to be, well, this is the last thing that Germany would want. Neville Chamberlain was convinced that if Czechoslovakia just gave up those 3.2 or whatever it was million Germans that lived in Czechoslovakia because of the post-World War I boundaries that were redrawn, that if he gave that up, everything would be fine. Well, what happened was initially that happened, but the Czechoslovakians pulled the Germans that were in Czechoslovakia, the Sudeten Germans, the borderland Germans, they pulled them out of those areas and put them in Prague, in the center of the country, because they were afraid that the German Czechs, the Sudeten Germans, would be some sort of an additional front and would take over the rest of Czechoslovakia or create the conditions for a war or be this enemy within. Well, what happened 3 months later was Germany just went in and invaded Czechoslovakia anyways, just rolled in, completely violating the Munich Agreement, completely dashing all the hopes of everyone in Europe and France that, you know what, once they had the Sudetenland, everything would be fine. Well, once that happened, they were released. And as he said, quite cogently, they were released into, and he used the word, the comfort of the German army. And he meant that sarcastically because what happened was the Germans were trying to convince a lot of these Czechoslovakian Germans, hey, you're back with us now. And not every Czechoslovakian German, in fact, maybe half of them didn't feel that way at all. So he was a prisoner in his own country because he was a German, and then released back into the Sudetenland because he was German. It was a very confusing time for these German-speaking people in these border regions who had not been part of the German, of the proper German-defined geographical country for several decades.
It's a confusing time for me too.
It is confusing, and that's why I prefaced this interview with our audience is saying this is something that you probably haven't heard a lot of during World War II, is what happened to these Europeans that were caught up on these boundary regions that have been historically fought over for centuries as Germany tried to find a way to basically reconstitute all the land that they lost after World War I. And in many cases, a lot of these Germans, not all, but a lot of these Germans felt like I'm living peaceably in this country that was defined as my new country after World War I. We're waving the flag, and now all of a sudden I'm a German again. And then the Czechoslovakians, of course, and other people in other areas like Poland and Lithuania and in France would look at the Germans with suspicion. And in fact, Ryan, do you remember when we were with Burton Smetkins last December in the Wilts, Luxembourg, Belgium area? And do you remember that there were towns that were technically part of the Allied nations, like in Belgium and in France, but they had historically been Germans for centuries? Remember how he spoke of some of these civilians as the Allies went through with suspicion, like the people around the town of Wereth, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember
Right.
that?
Of course. Yeah,
So
it was there's a lot of gray areas, I guess you could say, with where their loyalties would lie, you know.
bingo.
So,
And that's
yeah.
exactly what this story is. And this is a story of a young man trying to get a job who grew up in a Sudatenland, and he's caught in this vortex. He's been whipsawed. You got to remember, he's already been in a Czech army. He's been nationalized in a Czech army. He's sworn oath allegiance to them. He's been in the artillery. He was released from conscription. He did his service. He's trying to find another job. And then this happens in 1938. And now in the next clip, what he's going to talk about is what happened to a lot of these Germans who were in the border region, who weren't part of Germany during World War II, but who were occupied, how they would get sucked up and conscripted into the German army.
What sort of things were you hearing about what was going on in Germany that you did not know?
We did not know anything about the concentration camps or about the Jewish people being transported someplace. We had no idea. See?
So were you essentially at this point, did you become a German soldier at this point?
No.
Could you describe what happened in the intervening years between being handed back to the Germans and then becoming a soldier?
Yeah, since I had no job again home, I went to the KVG, the KVG, which is a company who had or which had buses going through whole Saxon and more the other areas.
Okay.
And this is where I worked for them. And I here again I was twice I was deferred because I was supposed to be important in my job. And the third time, that was in October 1940, I was drafted to the German army.
So he's already been conscripted into the Czechoslovakian army in 1932, 33, 34-ish. And now here we are in October 1940, and he gets reconscripted, this time in the German army. So what's transpired since Czechoslovakia became basically annexed in March of 1939? Well, on September 1st of 1939, Germany invaded Poland. And that's the proper start of the hot war of World War II. That's when France and England would declare war on Nazi Germany, not Russia. Russia was complicit in taking about half of Poland. They were allied with Germany at this time, but the Western powers formally declared war in September 1st, 1939. So about a year later, in October 1940, this would have been right after the invasion of France, during and after the invasion of France. That was summer of 1940, and they had defeated France fairly quickly. And then by October 1940, they were occupied. So he was brought in as a conscript right after the German army had defeated Poland and then went into France and defeated France. And this is really when Nazi Germany was in Europe now, was probably at the peak of their power before they would invade Russia the following year. And so he's brought in as a conscript. And from what I've read, there's no hard, firm numbers on the number of Czechoslovakians that enlisted in the German army versus were conscripted in the German army. We just know that, during the war years, Germany would draft and conscript within their own country about 19 million men under arms during the war. And that's about 1 million more than the United States would during World War II. And the United States had a population that was 50% larger. So it shows you how deep they were digging to get people later in a war. Well, at this point in the war, October 1940, they had plenty of manpower, plenty of men and material. They were at the peak of their power, but they knew that there was going to be a big thing happening in the following year in Russia. So they had another wave of conscription, and he got brought into that. Here's another stat that I looked up. A lot of these foreign fighters, a lot of these soldiers who came from other countries, whether it was Czechoslovakia or Norway, would join the SS. And I got the number right here, about 240,000 non-Germans made up the SS during the course of the war. And that's about 25% of their total strength. So it's interesting to me that the SS is seen as this pure Aryan fighting force, these supermen, and 25% of them consisted of, Norwegians and French and German Czechs from all across Nazi Germany. So that's where he is, Ryan. He's about to get sucked into this war as a part of a country that he didn't even fully was aligned with. And in this next clip, which we'll go ahead and play, it's going to talk about what he did in this war, what he'd end up doing, and basically his path to becoming a POW ultimately.
Before we move on, I want to kind of address something that he talked about. One of the things that they did not know about was the Holocaust, the concentration camps, the deep, the what was going on with the deportations and that sort of thing. And and I'm guilty of this myself. I mean, I used to be guilty of this. I've evolved, I guess you'd say, that's a politically correct way of saying it, in my thinking about this. I used to think, oh, well, come on. They all knew. They all knew about it. They were all complicit. They all knew, especially the German citizens, And, after we've interviewed Marta Warner and now with Jakob, or Julius Ernst Jakob, I do think there were likely people but I think it was probably a pretty small group that actually knew what was going on. Everyone could see the deportations happening. That was obvious. People were disappearing overnight. There was stuff going on, and that spread quickly across the country. I don't care how tight the security is. I'm sure that spread like wildfire. I think to myself, what, if the average citizen did not know about this, but they knew that people were being deported, and you didn't have to be just Jewish. You could be, a dissenter. You could be, whatever you want to call it. You could be a gypsy. You could be whatever wasn't deemed, getting along or deemed worthy of being a German citizen. And you could be ending up in the same fate. They don't know what's going on. If they don't know where these people are being sent, they just know they're being rounded up and shipped somewhere. That might be enough to keep a lot of people in line, because if everyone did know, if Hitler announced it in a speech and everyone knew about these camps, I can't help but think there might have been more trouble with the population against the Nazi government. I don't know. What do you think? I'm trying to wrestle with this whole notion of people saying we didn't know anything about it. I believe them. I believe them, especially like with Julius. He's a conscript,
Right.
I mean, and they don't want the conscripted soldiers to have a reason to fight back, so they want to keep that stuff quiet. But what do you think? I mean, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, and you've already alluded to this. This is really complex, and this is something that we still struggle with today, and historians struggle with it quite a bit. And I think it's pretty mixed. Like on one hand, the German high command, the Nazi Party, was very proud of the Jewish people they were killing and kept excellent records of it. But at the same time, they weren't so proud that they would publicly acknowledge to the German people in the world that they were doing it, because
Right.
maybe they felt like, yeah, I don't think everyone's on board with this, but we're going to do it anyways because it's for our own good. And then you have to also come to grips with the fact that um, most places in the world where Jews lived were anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. The Jews were seen as this lost, displaced race of people that were hated because of some of the functions they performed in society. They weren't allowed to take on, traditional middle class type craftsman jobs. So they would often, go into things like usury and money loaning and things like that, which made them unpopular early in the Middle Ages. And later on, they would become, intellectuals who, would write books on politics that were seen as very polarizing because they could, roll towards more socialist or communist slants. And so people could ascribe some of these to the Jews. So it's really, really super complex. I think, in my opinion, I think a lot more Germans probably knew what was going on by around 1944 than many of them would admit. But I don't think early in the war, which is what we're talking about here, we're talking about 1940. I really believe Julius. I don't think he knew. I think we're living in Czechoslovakia trying to find work. Next thing you know, he's being conscripted. And as we'll see soon, he'll be sent west to France. I don't think he had any idea what was going on. So it is very, very difficult. I don't think you can make a blanket statement that all the Germans knew or none of them knew. I think it is a case by case basis, and it's also dependent on what period that you're talking about. I think by mid 1944, I think a hell of a lot more people knew than maybe they'd want to admit. And by 1945, they certainly did. But
Well, and
think
about
I don't
these,
know.
these surrounding communities around these camps. I mean, if they don't know what's going on, they know something bad is going on
Yeah,
nonetheless. Don't you say a word. Remember what Marta said, and her dad
yeah.
told
Keep
her,
your mouth
keep your
shut.
mouth shut.
And that
Keep
and
your
that's
mouth
another thing
shut.
that complicates this, Ryan, is a lot of people could have known that something was going on, that there were these camps. I'm using air quotes here, but
Right.
I don't think a lot of people instantly felt like they were stuffing people in the ovens. That's quite a
Right.
stretch, right? To have a
I
camp,
yeah,
because the Germans had concentration
absolutely.
camps prior to the
Right.
war, which were like re-education centers where people would come back from.
And labor
For,
camps. Yeah, correct. Yes,
yeah,
that happened in Holland, for
in the
instance.
30s and stuff,
Yep.
when some people went to concentration camps or re-education camps in the 19 36, 37, 38, they'd come back from those. It was seen as kind of a political prison. It was literally that. But by the time 1942 rolls around, they were death camps. And so, yeah, how much they knew about that is a whole nother thing to add to the complexity.
So a great, okay. So one of the things you've probably heard Tony and I talk about on our podcast we did with Ray Harris on the history of World War II about our top 5 World War II films.
Mm-hmm.
One of the films I chose was a movie called Conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that movie is a portrayal in real time of the Wannsee Conference, which is where that Reinhard Heydrich, who was the considered third in command essentially in Nazi Germany, led the conference where he told all the governors of all these regions that Nazi Germany controlled, here's what this final solution is, and here's how you're going to implement it. Yeah. And no one had a choice.
Yep.
Okay. What was amazing about that happened on January the 20th, 1942. Think about what's going on in the war at that point, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, everything's rolling Germany's way for the most part, right? They had just started, was it 1941 they started invading Russia?
Yeah, in June of 41. So they were deep into Russia at this time, and they had not lost at Stalingrad yet.
So they were okay. They knew that this was what they wanted to do. And one of the key lines in that movie is where one of the characters is confronting Reinhard Heydrich at a break in the conference about his problems with this. And how, is Hitler aware of this? Is all this, going on? And Heydrich said to him, basically, Hitler's never going, there's not going to be any paper trail to Hitler.
Yeah.
In other words, it's always going to be denied.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they knew,
Yep.
they knew if things didn't go their way, they would all hang separately,
and yet they were very proud of what they were doing. The Nazis felt like they were literally doing the world a favor.
If you want to see I think it's a absolutely fascinating movie. It's called Conspiracy. And, when that conference happened, it's filmed, first of all, in the actual conference room where the conference happened back in 1942. And there was, at the end of the conference, everything was transcribed and everyone was told to destroy their version that they received. There was supposed to be no record of this. Well, lo and behold, a record made it out. And that is what was used to make this movie from. And it's literally a real-time portrayal from the script, the transcription of the meeting. It is amazing to see it brought to life. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off the subject here. I'm just trying to say that, I do think it's very plausible that most people, I'd say 95% of the people of the Germans, of the Nazis in Germany, of the Germans in Germany, didn't know the full extent of what was going on. And they were so petrified of these people disappearing in the dark of night that, like Marta said, you didn't say a word. You couldn't look over your shoulder without fear of actually being turned in by your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
And so I think that fear gripped the entire nation, and it caused people to behave the way they did. So
yeah, and I'll just say that from my perspective, I think more Germans knew, but I don't think they really knew the depth of it. And I think
that's what I was saying.
Exactly. And I don't think I think that you have to look at it at when you were during the war, when you asked, well, did the Germans know? Because in 1940, I think things were very different in terms of what was going on and who knew what than, say, 1945. And you here we're talking about 1940. I don't think Julius knew. I think later on he knew, and he was like, holy crap, I didn't know that stuff was coming down. He just knew that he was being, sucked back and forth between Czechness and Germanness. And ultimately now he finds himself fighting the German army. And that's what these next few clips are going to be about.
Okay.
We went to a city that was close to Hanover. I forgot the name, what it was. And from Hanover, we marched with the, I don't know the name of the battery or so, or the, just a part, we were a part of the 6th Army. And we walked through Belgium and France, a part of France. In France, first we were stationed in Fécamp. It's on the ocean, on the coast. And after several months, we were transferred to Le Havre. And this was the Heereskustenbatterie 266.
Okay.
And we had the 10 centimeter cannons, or Haubitze called. And there again, I was in the office, and in Le Havre, we were assigned to defend our country against the English.
So you were part of the Atlantic Wall defense. What they call the Atlantic Wall. Were you part of that defensive system?
Yeah, I guess so. We just were in Le Havre, and that was it.
Could you explain really quickly what you were doing, what your role was before you got transferred to artillery? Were you infantry?
Yes, I was infantry, and the Sixth Army was transferred then to Russia, and the day before I was transferred to the artillery based on a request I sent to the army, to the Sixth Army.
And that request, was that because you had experience in the artillery before with the Czech army?
This yes, because I was necessary for these cannons, you know.
So let me just recap this because there was a bit of an audio glitch on that. That's not your radio, people.
I thought it was on my end.
No,
I was like, crap.
I think it's the only one we had. There's a couple of these glitches in some of these older recordings, and I think it's the only one that's in here. But basically what happened is he gets drafted October 1940. The war in France is over. He doesn't fight in that. He marches across northern France into Le Havre, which is basically on the north coast in Belgium. And he is basically part of the Sixth Army. And for the people who may have sounded the Sixth Army, where does it sound familiar? Well, the following year, okay, and not even that, 6 months later, the Sixth Army would be a major part of the Southern force that would invade Russia. And in a year and a half after he was assigned to the Sixth Army, they would be surrounded and destroyed and captured by the Russian army at Stalingrad. So this is that Sixth Army. So without anyone possibly knowing that this was going to happen, he just knew that they were going to go to Russia. And he went to his commander. He said, look, can I stay here? I'm part of this artillery battery that's defending the Atlantic Wall. And I think that my services could be better used here than marching across Russia. And his commander said, yeah, absolutely, which probably quite literally saved his life, quite frankly. I don't know how anyone from the Sixth Army would have been able to survive a year and a half of that. I certainly, Jakob probably wouldn't have. So he dodged a metaphorical bullet in this case, maybe not a metaphorical, maybe an actual real one in Russia. And now he finds himself in the Atlantic Wall. And so the Atlantic Wall was basically a series of fortifications along the north coast of Europe to help prevent an invasion, a cross-channel invasion from England. And he was part of one of these batteries. And these batteries were 10-centimeter cannons, which is not a very big cannon, Ryan. It's a 4-inch. That translates to about a 4-inch gun, 10 centimeters to inches. And a 4-inch gun is not huge, at a long barrel, high velocity. But they made 1,400 of these. They were very popular. That shot a 33-pound charge. It had an effective range of 12 miles. And its job, there's a bunch of these batteries across the wall, the Atlantic Wall, and some of them were much larger, of course, was to not only harass any sort of shipping that could occur, but if there was an invasion, to be some of the cannons that would shoot down on the invasion beaches, a la Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan, and prevent the invasion from occurring.
If you, for anyone out there listening, and you are geographically stunted in knowledge, like I am, just to kind of give you a little lay of the land, Le Havre, or it depends on who you are or where you're from, Le Havre, whatever. It's the second largest port along the French coast, and it is actually today, if you were to take a ferry across from England to France, most of the main ferries come into Le Havre. And they actually it's at the mouth of the River Seine, which is the main river that goes through Paris and empties out into the English Channel right there at Le Havre and everything. So the Germans, like as he mentioned, they actually occupied Le Havre from June of 1940. It was right after, France fell in May, and they, Dunkirk happened and all that kind of stuff, and the Germans held Le Havre from that point on. So but I know a lot of times these towns get thrown around, and it's easy to forget where they're at. I wish, one of the things that I think would be great for us on our video channel is to put maps in and show where things are going on as they're describing them, and their movements across Europe and everything. And But anyway, I just wanted
No,
to do a little sidebar on that.
I'm glad you did because I misspoke earlier and said it was Le Havre in Belgium, and I'm way
Oh, okay.
off. So no,
Yeah.
this is really great. So yeah, Le Havre is basically due east of Caen. It's part of the far eastern flank of what would be the Normandy invasion beaches,
Mhm.
and that's going to matter because that means it was the first part of the Atlantic Wall that would be captured, and we're going to have more on that in just a minute. But before we get to that particular event, the next clip is going to talk about what was it like to be, part of this occupying force, and what was his daily role like, and what did he have to do to help maintain the cannon.
But they were on a circle, and the cannons could be turned in 360 degrees if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I did also, I was not only in the office, I also did some surveying.
Could you describe what that means? What sort of surveying did you do?
Yes, we had to train. That was actually before the before the invasion, you see.
So this is before the Normandy invasion?
Oh yes,
Okay.
yeah. We trained to use the cannons.
Okay.
You know? And I was the one. First of all, the coordinates were known to me from certain areas. See, and from there, I surveyed the direction in which we were shooting with the cannons.
Okay.
And there is one interesting thing to laugh about. We had at one time one shot. We did not know where it went first.
Okay.
Later on, we found out there were on the side a damage, which made the cannon, which made the
projectile?
To the going to the right. See, and we hit a post office. in Le Havre, but that post office was actually the army post office. There was an old man in there.
Ooh.
And a goat.
Really?
Both were at the time not home.
Oh. So you blew up your own mail.
And after that, they called us the Feldpostbatterie. The Feldpostbatterie.
Nice.
Okay,
That does not surprise me at all that there was a goat that was supposed to be there. What is that all about?
we're stopping for this one. I initially asked Ryan to play two clips back to back, but this is we're stopping in because he basically, it's good to know we hear of these errant things that the Allies do. Like there was a destroyer during World War II that when FDR was coming across the Atlantic for one of the summits, had accidentally shot a torpedo at the battleship, the U.S. battleship that he was on. And also accidentally launched depth chargers. It's just a big comedy of errors. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the American military was so green then. It's good to know that the German army, as professional as they were, could accidentally blow up their own freaking mail. And luckily, no one died. No one got hurt.
I like how they had a nickname after that, like basically the post office blower upper battalion.
Exactly. And you know how German with all their long stretched out names.
Right.
That's basically what you just said in German. You are the post office blower upper. So at any rate, he would spend about almost 2 years there, and then these things would happen, which you're going to hear about in the next clip.
What were you guys trained to do with these cannons? Were you trained to shoot at ships or airplanes or men, or what were you trained to do?
No, ships.
Ships.
Yeah.
So you were a coastal battery aiming for ships.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were supposed to hold the whole invasion with our battery.
Okay. Do you remember the invasion day very well? Could you describe what happened when the Allies landed?
No, we didn't know. I cannot tell you the time, even or the day.
Mm-hmm.
we only at one time we heard that an invasion started, and we have been attacked.
Yeah. Yeah. And how'd you feel about that? What were you thinking?
Well, when it comes down to in a war, you feel like what comes comes. All the other feelings you just you put aside. And this is my feeling. I don't know how other people felt.
So do you remember the events that transpired on D-Day when the Allies landed? Do you remember what you were doing and what transpired?
I had no idea
You had
actually.
no idea.
We were only
You're too far removed.
we were only in our quarters. And it was Belleville, close to Le Havre, and we were living from day to day
Okay.
until at one time we heard that we are surrounded by our enemies, and we just waited.
I just want to say real quick, he said he didn't know anything about D-Day happening. He was 50 miles away from like Omaha Beach. So I'm surprised he couldn't hear the artillery and everything, but I mean, I guess that explains it. I mean, 50 miles away is enough to not really know what was going on. I don't know. So.
And not only that, but a lot of times they would spend time in bunkers. He might have been like in the early morning when this was happening. They may have been in bunkers. They may not have been able to hear anything. I was kind of surprised by that as well, given that it's on the eastern flank of the invasion beach.
Right.
But yeah, so when I interviewed him, it's like, oh, he's going to talk about D-Day. He's going to talk about all the bombers going across. I'm sure after that, he that would have been something he would have seen. But on D-Day itself, it was a non-event for those guys, which, by the way, is really interesting because the whole idea for attacking the beaches at Normandy was to hit them where they ain't, was to go where they were not. And he was along that that fortress Europe, the Atlantic Wall, where Germany expected the invasion to occur a little further east of there. And the fact that they didn't even know D-Day occurred meant that the feint worked supremely well.
So obviously the high command thought the main invasion would come at Calais. Well, Calais is 115 miles northeast of Le Havre. So he's kind of sandwiched in between where they thought things were going to happen there. So anyway, I'm just doing a little researching here as we're talking, because I'm like, geographically, just wondering, maybe, you'd think that as the invasion was happening, they'd say, just so y'all know, Normandy's getting hit right now.
Right.
There's a bunch of guys coming ashore. We don't know if that's the real invasion or not, but as a low-level guy, he probably wouldn't know. I don't know, but
it's interesting. This is why we do these oral histories, because you wonder, what did the other side feel when this occurred? How much of D-Day, I mean, from the Allied perspective, we were, that were participating in D-Day, it was this huge, gigantic event with hundreds of thousands of men. But for a lot of places along Germany, a lot of them wouldn't find out about it until days later when they started allowing troop movement to occur in that area. And for him at this portion of the Atlantic Wall, that day at least was a non-event. What would happen subsequent to that would be an event, but yeah, not really much for him to talk about there.
And could you describe the events that transpired between when you found out you were surrounded and when you actually got captured?
Yeah, actually, we always had duty, a certain group. The cannons always had to be ready to be fired. Everybody else had to be standing by, and we were, I think, 3 or 4 parts standing by at the guns. We were always ready to shoot.
Okay.
And that's all we had to do. And they took very, very long because we were captured in, I think it was in October 44.
How were you captured? Could you describe that?
Yes, our captain called me. He was in a outpost with some people, and he told me that an English officer is next to him. I told him what our general gave us the order, and our general said, no defense, no shot will be fired.
Mm.
And when the English soldiers came, and we were in the bunkers, and one just was there to look out, and he was put up the white flag.
Yeah.
And everybody came out of the bunkers. I called, and all the others in charge called that everybody was out of the bunkers.
Mm-hmm.
And then one English officer and one of our soldiers went with them to the bunkers to be sure everybody is out.
Okay.
We were put on trucks and went north. From there, we went by landing boats to England, and we stayed in England about 2 or 3 weeks. I don't even know exact. From there, we went with the Aquedania ship with a Geleitzug, with the a lot of ships surrounded
Yes.
us,
Big convoy.
We went to New York. We had no idea where we went. We were not told until we were close to New York. And they allowed us, the English officers, to get out and see New York.
Wow. Think about the power that New York, the United States had culturally, even back then.
Oh my gosh.
Where here you are, you're a POW, you're on a British ship, and you're heading over to the United States to become a POW, and they're like, "Hey, you want to come see the Statue of Liberty?" Everyone's like, "Hell yeah!" I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Right. I mean, remember, I forget what movie it was. I don't know if it was Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers. Everything comes back to that for me.
Right.
But where the German soldier gets captured and he's like, Betty Grable, what the dish? And he keeps saying all these American slang things that he knows from watching movies. And it just goes to show that you're right. The cultural impact that Hollywood and the United States had on Europe, one of the things that, and I'm looking at your notes, Tony, but did he mention Operation Estonia, or is that you put that in there?
No, I put that in there. So he mentions October. The operation was wrapped up before October, but that was the only major operation that I found where their job, it was the British and Canadian troops, were to clear out that portion of the Atlantic Wall around Le Havre.
I am blown away, no pun intended, here, but I'm blown away it took us that long to go up and down the coast and clear all that stuff out. I mean, obviously we had other ports we could use. We could use Cherbourg, that was but even that was under submarine assault, as we know from the Jack Hamlin series, but I mean, he mentions September, October. I'm like, what? Was he not in Le Havre anymore? Surely he wasn't in Le Havre still.
Because that's pretty close. Like I said, 50 miles from the invasion beaches. And by the time we broke out, you thought that would have been a primary thing. I was surprised at how long it took the Allies to clear that portion of the Atlantic Wall out, because I think everyone, if you haven't heard from our audience, we actually had to make our own piers, like the Mulberry Harbors and whatnot, off the invasion beaches to supply our forces. We were constantly behind the 8 ball trying to supply our forces as they made their way across France into Germany. We were always looking for ports. Even the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge, they were trying to go up into Antwerp because that was one of our ports. So yeah, it did surprise me that it took several months for us to go into this major port.
So, you think about the Battle of Normandy. Okay, D-Day happens. All of our forces come ashore. What's the first town we make a beeline to? St. Lo, right?
Yeah.
St. Lo takes much longer than we thought
Yeah.
to capture because the Germans threw everything at it. So then Patton swings around, does the breakout at St. Lo, comes around and starts to encircle the German army. And then it's a mad race back to the east for the German army to get out of there before the news closes on them. And we almost captured a couple of German armies, with that move. And then we were in full hot pursuit of the German army at that point. And we ended up going through Paris. We liberated Paris in August, right? So we were very, very distracted, obviously.
Yep.
We knew that if we had encircled these German armies and captured them, the war could very well have been over by Christmas. That was always the saying. So now I guess it's kind of making sense to me, the timeline here.
Yeah, and not only that, but it also makes sense about how this operation went down and why there were so few Allied casualties. It was because the German army was in full retreat, full rout, and heavily demoralized by September of 1944. Because the battle to take this portion of the Atlantic Wall around Le Havre, which is a pretty important harbor, was fought between September 10th and 12th of 1944, just 3 months or so after the initial assault. And it was conducted by British and Canadian troops, and it allowed it was the first large scale use on this assault on Le Havre and these other fortifications of these of these American Sherman and Churchill flail tanks and crab tanks to help take care of mines and to lay down bridges over ditches and canals to continue the assault. And these specialty units of these Churchill crabs and these flailing Shermans and stuff would take heavy casualties, but it only took a couple of days. Day one of the assault was seen as a textbook combined arms assault between the Navy, the Air Force, and the assault troops. And then on day two, on the second day, it reads here in a common source that the attack continued with support of Hawker Typhoons and armored vehicles basically the forces were facing the threat of the Churchill Crocodile flame-throwing tanks.
Right. I was reading that too. That I'd not heard of flamethrower tanks being used in Normandy hardly at all.
Exactly. Because they weren't, a lot of them couldn't make it on shore. And by the time they were using them. But what's really interesting about this 2-day assault, it was combined arms, and a lot of these, they called him Churchill funnies, which Churchill had all these ideas about how to reconstitute these tanks into things like flame-throwing tanks and anti-mine tanks and all these weird things. Well, they were used here to great effect. And the outcome is that on the third day of the assault, the town center was cleared by the infantry of both divisions that were forcing the German garrison's commander to surrender at 11:45. This is what Julius is talking about. And they were captured as German prisoners of war. There were a little over 11,000 German prisoners taken, with fewer than 500 Allied casualties. And that may speak to what you were saying, Ryan. We had already had this. We were still continuing to push the Germans back very rapidly to the south of where this particular battle occurred. And I think the Germans felt like it didn't make a whole lot of sense at this point in the war to put up a strong defense. So basically by September 12th, what you just heard Julius say was his commander came to him as captain and said, look, it's over. Don't fire a shot. Go ahead and surrender. And that, I think, is a really good zeitgeist for what was going on at the time. When he surrendered, the German army felt like it was about ready to fall apart and get defeated.
So this battle, this Operation Estonia, was September 10th, 11th. Basically, it was over on the 12th. And what's interesting, and that's 50 miles, as we said, as a crow flies up from Normandy, where the main action was taking place. But I was wondering, when did Calais fall? It's 115 miles away. Did it fall before that, after that? Well, it fell on September. Well, the battle for it started on September 25th and ended on October 1st.
Okay.
So they were just moving up the coast there. And I'm just a bit amazed that they left these guys there, which speaks to the fear that I think Hitler and the high command had that Normandy was a feint.
Yep. And we talked about this with a recent Ray Harris podcast, with something that you and Ray brought up, which is airing right now, as we're recording this episode about the top 5 Nazi blunders, about this ideology that that Hitler had of every city is a fortress, every position is a bastion of strength. You will fight to the last man. Well, what we're hearing in many cases is, yeah, that happened in a lot of areas like Metz and Aachen and certain areas of the Battle of the Bulge. But at this point in the war, I think a lot of Germans were like, we are so screwed. This is a war on a second front. The Americans are in full effect. And here we're getting pushed back in Italy. And I think at this point in the war, a lot of the Germans were like, I think we're done. And not only that, but the German commander was the commander with his guns facing the wrong way on the Atlantic Wall, where the invasion was not happening, with a bunch of conscript troops. We heard that on D-Day, right? About how there's a bunch of Polish conscripts and stuff. So the fighting effectiveness when you have a bunch of conscripts from different countries who speak different languages is diminished. So it makes perfect sense why the German commander said, we're not going to put up a big fight. Let's move out of here. In fact, there were more casualties, over 1,100 casualties by civilians in the Le Havre area than there were Allied casualties or German casualties, as is the case in most wars. The civilians suffered more than the armies did.
I still maintain that the reason why those guys were kept there all that time was because Hitler and the high command thought that we were going to come across at Calais eventually. Well, you know, and then they didn't see Patton on the European continent until July.
Yeah.
But that's when he came over, July 6th, exactly a month after D-Day. But I'm just surprised that they kept those guys there. They could have used them to squeeze us and come down from the northeast, you know?
Amen. I mean, we had this big pincer coming in, not the pincer, but this big thrust coming in to the south of them. Yeah, having all those troops with all those, 10 centimeter cannons and everything else that was on the Atlantic Wall, just turn the guns the other way and start to attack our left flank. I think that might have had an effect. So the feint, the fog of war, Hitler's inability to reallocate troops where they were needed, and just instead of just leaving them there to have some fortress-like mindset, all that played a role in their ultimate defeat. So, all right. Now he is a POW. We have several clips on this, and I think it's rather interesting. It's a pretty significant departure from previous people we featured on the American side were POW. So
have we ever had a guy on here that was a German POW in the United States?
Negatory, Morning Glory. This is a first where we've got from a German, Czechoslovakian, Wehrmacht conscripted soldier's view of what it was like to be sucked into the hinterland of the enemy in North America.
Well, I mean, describe what you're feeling. I mean, just a few weeks ago, you're defending a coastal battery.
Yeah.
D-Day has already occurred. The Russians are to the east, the Allies are to the west, and now you're on a ship in New York Harbor. I mean, what were you thinking? What was going through your mind?
No, first of all, we had quite a few days time on the ship with the English soldiers.
What was your relationship with the English soldiers?
Just the best.
Really?
Yeah, we had on the ship. We were so many people. There are quite a few artists on, and they put a show together, and everybody, not only us, the English people were sitting with us and watched the shows. We had a couple of alarms, U-boat alarms, and we had to go down, and we started again, and that was our entertainment.
Did you say U-boat?
When we came finally to New York, we started breathing up.
Really?
Because we knew it is over for us, the danger.
Yeah.
And from there, first of all, we could have our showers and everything. We got new clothes. We said POW.
Yeah.
And a big red circle on our back, And from there on, we went north, and then we were told that we go to Canada,
Do you remember what part of Canada you went to?
Alberta, Medicine Hat, Alberta.
Pretty cold up there.
Yes, and warm in the summertime.
Really?
Yeah.
And I imagine at that point, New York City wasn't blacked out at that point in the war. I mean, you probably saw New York
yes,
City.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
lights and everything.
completely dark.
It-
But interesting too, on the trip from on the train, 4-day trip to Canada, to Medicine Hat, Alberta. They forgot to put the Red Cross had chocolate and cigarettes for us, and they forgot to pick it up. So the soldiers in the train collected money together to give us chocolate and cigarettes.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
What a radical departure from what the Americans or the Allies would face in POW camps in Japan and in Germany. So let's just recap this. First, on the boat ride over there, he has to worry about getting shot at by his own U-boats, which immediately caused Ryan significant anxiety.
Started to sweat.
You did. I don't even know if you listened to the rest of the clip after that, because your fear of submarines. They don't get hit by a German U-boat. They make it in New York Harbor. He's in awe of what he sees. You're gonna hear more about that later. And then on the way over on the boat, they're hanging out with English. They're having shows. They're eating food. They're just like having a celebration. This is great. Hey, the war's over for you. It was,
Well, that's immediately what I thought is these
Yeah.
guys had to be so thankful at that point that they survived, most of them hopefully without wounds, any grievous wounds at least. But I wonder, like with him being a conscript and not a real dyed in the wool Nazi,
Yep.
and everything, if that was part of what made them be able to get along so well and really not harbor any deep feelings. They were just there to do a job. They got sucked into this whole vortex.
yeah. I wondered that too when I was listening to this, like now during this clip. It's like, I wonder if they knew he was a Czech. I wonder if that made a difference. And then in the last clip, the second clip that we played on the train ride to Canada, someone forgot to load up the cigarettes and the donuts and the coffee. That sounds terrible. And so the soldiers on the train used their own money, hard-earned greenbacks and Canadian loonies or whatever they call them, and bought with their own money cigarettes and donuts and everything for the German soldiers. This is so different from the death march that the Americans had to do, being stuffed onto box cars full of feces and hay, and people having to crap out of windows and freezing to death, and getting into the camps where they were being fed sawdust in their bread. I mean, what a contrast. Holy crap.
Well, those countries were at the business end of our war effort.
Yep.
And when you came the other direction, you went the other direction in the quality of life.
And this would have an impact. And I have some stats on this later about the POWs that were in the United States and Canada, about their view of the Allies, the people they were fighting against. And quite frankly, I think it would have a role in how the United States, Canada, Britain, whatnot were seen after the war by these belligerents, and why we're allies with these countries today. But he still has some more things to tell us about being a POW. So let's go ahead and play the next clip.
What were the conditions like at the POW camp?
In the camp, well, we had food we didn't have for years.
Really?
Yeah. We had everything we could wish. We had a good breakfast, a very good English porridge, and we had, there were soldiers there already before. We had actually, the German soldiers had the right then to build a farm, We had pigs. We have cows.
Really?
And we have fields. Mostly we had onions, and the onions were sold, and for that money, we could buy a lot of things for the good of us. We had very, very good food, and Saturdays and Sundays we could go out into the country.
I guess they figured where you're going to go, right?
Word of honor. If one POW disappears, it will be cancelled forever. It did not happen.
Okay. So there's good discipline within the camps then?
Yeah, the things practically, it wasn't necessary to have soldiers around. There were soldiers around, yes, but very few.
From what I read, this is a relatively unique experience in World War II where, you know, the POWs were treated well and there was plenty of food to feed the POWs. For example, on the German side, they didn't have the sort of resources to take care of the POWs like the Americans did. I mean, did you kind of look around and think, well, this isn't such a bad deal? I mean, how'd you feel about that?
First of all, we really did not even know what went on in Russia, how bad it was there.
So you didn't have anything to compare it to then?
No,
Interesting.
We weren't told, and we actually weren't interested.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned. For me, that the war was over and that was it.
A man without a country, in a way, you know.
Totally. That's fair. I mean, you're watching these guns, you get captured, you get sent over. You might think that this is just what being a POW was. And that was not true at all. I mean, we just kind of compared and contrasted that. I got some stats on this. Ryan, do you have any stats on the POWs and the camps and whatnot from the Germans that went over there?
I only have some information on this camp, on the Medicine Hat camp.
Let me just give a general overview of the number of prisoners, and then why don't you talk about the camp, because I don't have anything on that. So just for our audience, there was a little over 400,000 POWs that were kept or housed in the United States, and about 34,000 that were sent to Canada. So the vast majority of them went to the United States, but the experience between both was very similar. You just heard him say that they could work on farms, sell their produce, and then keep the money to buy stuff for themselves. You heard him say they're allowed to just kind of walk around town, go out in the fields and do stuff.
My mind.
Unbelievable.
Can't get over that.
I can't either. You heard him say that they didn't need very many soldiers to guard them for a couple of reasons. One, where would they go? And two, why would they go? So
why would they? Right.
So I just wanted to let the audience know that's kind of the amount. Basically, just under 500,000 POWs were in the United or in North America at the time. Most of them were in other countries. But I don't know anything about this camp, Ryan, so I'm interested to hear about that.
So the camp in Medicine Hat, Alberta is called Camp 132. Okay. That's what it's known as. It was the largest prisoner of war camp in Canada and the site of two of the most serious incidents of violence in any POW facility in North America. Whoa. So as an overview of the camp and the location, like he said, it's outside, it's just south of the city of Medicine Hat. It was built in 1942. It was only 120 acres in size, surrounded by double barbed wire fencing and guard towers. It could hold up to 12,500 prisoners, mostly Germans, including Luftwaffe and Afrika Korps soldiers that were captured in North Africa. Had 12 large compounds with barracks, a hospital, workshops, kitchen, sports fields, and a theater. It was one of the 4 large Western camps. The others were at Lethbridge, which was Camp 133, another one at Kananaskis, and another one at Seeb. The conditions were strict but humane. And prisoners worked on local farms, like you said, in lumber camps, sugar beet fields. Inside, they organized classes, orchestras, plays, and sports, creating a self-contained community. You know, and a lot of POW camps did that very same thing. These guys had to keep busy, keep their minds off of things, and so on. Many POWs were ideologically divided, some fiercely loyal Nazis. Others were opposed to the regime. So there was a murder in the camp. Camp 132 became infamous for 2 murders committed by Nazi hardliners against fellow German prisoners that they accused of disloyalty.
Wow.
First murder was in August 22nd of 1943, so prior to Julius coming over. A German anti-Nazi who had spoken favorably of the Allies was beaten and hanged inside a hut, and authorities discovered the body staged as a suicide. An investigation revealed it was murder by pro-Nazi inmates. The second one was in December of 44. He would have been there for this one. The victim was August Piazik, another moderate prisoner suspected of intending to inform on hardliners. Again, he was lynched by Nazi extremists within the camp. Canadian military police investigated. Several prisoners were tried and convicted. 5 POWs were executed by hanging in Lethbridge in 1946, the largest mass execution in Canadian history.
I'll be damned.
These executions marked one of the few times that foreign POWs were executed on Canadian soil for crimes committed within a camp. Now, I remember reading about this same sort of thing happening in Texas, I think.
I do too. It was the same thing. You have these hardline Nazis, and if you weren't loyal enough, they would get some street justice on you.
Exactly. Right. So anyway, the camp was closed in 1946, of course, and after repatriation of the prisoners to Germany, many former POWs later returned to Canada as immigrants, recalling their time in Alberta positively, despite the tension. Today, only a few foundations and interpretive signs remain on the original site, southeast of Medicine Hat. So anyway, that's a bit of the detail on the camp.
We're going to have a clip on this later, but I'll just talk about it a little bit right now. Out of the, 400 and some thousand POWs that were in North America, a little over 1%, they were called the 1%ers, would never go back home. There's about 5,000 POWs who just escaped after the war and stayed there. They're like, you know what? I'm not. And some of them may have been German. Some of them may have been in lesser situations, Poland, whatever, Ukraine. I don't know, but whatever the reason, I know, because we're going to hear a clip from Julius shortly, that what they saw and the way they were treated as POWs played a big role in how they perceived their political system versus ours. And at the end of the day, ours would win. Ours would win the
hearts and minds.
The hearts and minds and the moral battle because of the things that we did. We could have starved these guys. We could have put them in the forced labor camps, not let them farm, not let them keep their money. We could have done all that. And I don't think the American people or the Canadians would have had any problem with that at all. I think they've been like, you know what? They're POWs. They started this damn war. They're going to build roads for us. We're going to work the living holy hell out of them. I don't think anyone would have cared, but that's not what we did, even though we could have. And that's something I'm proud of, to be honest with you, as an American, to know that the way we conducted that war. And this isn't some God and country stuff. I know there's some of our listeners may listen like, oh, here they go again on the Americans being perfect. Wars are terrible. They're horrible. Massacres occur, atrocities occur, all these terrible freaking things occur. But whenever I hear someone trying to say, well, if you look at a massacre, like in the Melmandy massacre, the Americans did exactly the same thing. I point to things like this. I point to things like how we treated our POWs and our prisoners and whatnot. It's like, you know what? It wasn't the same thing. There was a difference in how the Americans conducted war and how other countries during World War II did. And that's just
not just the Americans. I mean, the Allies.
Absolutely.
Obviously Canada treated them this way. I think, look at the British soldiers that were getting along with the German POWs on the ship on the way over to New York, having, doing things with them and that sort of thing. So
totally. Yeah. And I think the core of all of it is these democratic nations that banded together to fight fascists. The democratic nations believed in individuals. They believed in human rights. They believed in human being. The goal of a democratic state isn't to make the citizens small. It's to make them an integral part of it through a variety of processes, including voting. The fascist states treated their people like cogs in a machine, like ants in an ant colony. and they didn't care about humans at the way that the democratic system did. And that was, I think, was a big differentiator in both sides of those wars. So
What's our next
Okay.
clip?
So the next clip that we're going to kick around is, yeah, he's a POW, but the war's got in at some point. What did that look like?
So how long were you in a POW camp?
In Canada, I was about 1.5 years.
1.5 years. Where were you when you found out that the war in Europe was over? I mean, what were you doing? Do you remember?
Yes, we were told by the English soldiers. No?
And how did you feel about that?
No, first of all, we asked, how long do we have to stay? When do we go home?
Mm-hmm.
That certainly was not known, because after the 1.5 years in Canada, we went to England, South Wales, and we were there for another almost 1.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And there again, the treatment was, we had the same food as the soldiers. And we cannot complain. We had the right, or we were invited. Sometimes we were selected, and we were invited to some English families. And I remember one time I went to a family, but then we were asked, for instance, how it feels to drink out of nice porcelain cups. Then we told them that we don't drink out of metal
They thought you
containers.
they thought you drank out of a stein or something, or
we had the same thing what they had.
so they had this misperception of what it meant to be a German then.
Yeah. We had some interviews with some English officers, and they probably wanted to find out what you are thinking, if you are a Nazi or anything like that. The interviews, and there was a white, a gray, and a black. So if you were black, you had to stay probably very, very long. I wasn't completely white, because I wasn't the Czech army and I wasn't the German army. But it wasn't too long, and the time passed because we had a lot of freedom, and we were standing guards. I used to was selected for camp police, see? And we were standing always, one of us and one of the English English soldiers. We were standing guard, see, and one thing happened. The English soldiers, he fell asleep. We had a little hut where we were in there, and he fell asleep. And I heard the officer coming. He always went out checking.
Yeah.
And I woke him up. And the officer, he was Captain Saunders, asked, did he sleep? I said, no, he didn't sleep. I guess I found out later on that for sure he didn't believe me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that I covered up for my colleague.
Yep.
English soldier, right?
You heard him call him his colleague, right? That's why I put this clip in there. It's such a weird thing to be brought as a POW to England, and then on one hand you're being graded on how big of a Nazi you are, which is going to dictate how you're treated and how quickly you go back. But on the other hand, you're hanging out in English homes and then on guard duty with other English soldiers and then covering their ass for them when they're falling asleep. I mean, it was a really strange time, I would think, to be him.
Right, because this is post-war.
Us. This is a
And-
year and a
and-
half after the war.
Yeah,
He was
not
yes, he was
yeah.
in between the little timeline here between the war ending and finally getting to England and doing all this stuff in England. He was in England for a year and a half. He wouldn't make it over 45, 40, for 1947. He wouldn't make it to the continent. And this whole time they're just doing this, which I thought was really kind of, I didn't realize that.
So I wonder if doing this mixing was part of the denazification.
Ooh, very good comment.
I
It might have
wonder if
been
that's
more
what was
deliberate.
going on. And maybe when he asked him, was he sleeping? Maybe the guy was checking to see if he was going to rat the guy out, or in other words, harbor ill feelings towards him, or stick up for him. And I wonder if maybe there was some psychology going on there.
There may have been, Rhino. I hadn't thought of that. That's a good thought, dude. And well, ultimately, he'd have to make it back to what would be his home. Although we're going to hear shortly that looked a lot different than when he left. So we may play a couple clips in a row, but this is him going back to Europe, to, in this case, Germany, even though his home is in Czechoslovakia. We'll get more than that later. This is how he kind of gets settled back in.
So
How good was could you speak some English at this point, or are you still speaking German?
we could speak in, we were all Germans together there. We spoke mostly German.
Mm-hmm.
But once in a while, I had the wish, to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned somehow.
Okay.
Because after I came home, I was working for the American Army.
Yeah. Well, could you describe that? And when did you finally make it home? And what was that like? And where was home? Where did you go to?
I was lucky. My parents were in Munich,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I have been sent.
Okay.
And in Munich, I was going for a job, and if you were not either from Bavaria, you did not get a job.
Ah.
And they asked they had a German word, Zuzugsgenehmigung. That means the okay to move to Germany, to move to Munich.
Mm-hmm.
And for that you needed a job. When you wanted to have a job, the okay to live in Munich, then you needed the authorization. So then I had some people who had connection with some English soldiers, and I started working the first office, personnel office, and then in a payroll.
Okay.
And it was in Munich, post exchange,
And was this for the American Army at this time?
just for the American Army.
Was this your first contact with Americans at this point?
No, and my little English,
Mm-hmm.
gave me a chance to work in that office.
Mm-hmm.
And then they closed, and I had to get another job, and that was in the Munich Post Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there until I immigrated to America.
And what year was that you
It
immigrated over
was
here?
1953.
What made you decide to immigrate to the United States?
First of all, my sister said she would have somebody here of the family, from the family.
We were here already.
You guys were here already?
Yeah. And then already when I saw the first time New York,
Mm-hmm.
I said after the war, this is where I go.
Interesting. So that left an impression on you.
Yeah.
That's
Shining city on a hill.
Amen. So, I mean, they couldn't go back to Czechoslovakia, and I'm going to unpack that more later. You heard a female voice. That's his sister, Barbara. And she kind of blazed the path to the United States because it was easier for her as a civilian to do that. And you're going to hear more about why he was a bit delayed to make it over there. It basically has to do with him being part of an organization that the United States didn't entirely trust. We'll touch that more later. But at the end of the day, what got him the United States was that first view of New York City and the Statue of Liberty. that was the thing. He made a decision then on that ship that this is where he was going to go when the war was over. And I thought that was really cool.
I mean, okay, let's think about this for a second. That statue welcomed countless hundreds of thousands, millions of people as immigrants throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. And with the promise of a new life, the promise of starting over. And this was no different. I mean, he was going back to, a part of the country, a part of the continent that didn't necessarily want him there,
Yep.
But he remembers how he felt when he saw the Statue of Liberty, and that was strong enough to pull him back over here. It's amazing.
And think about the magnanimity of the American people who had just fought a 3.5, 4 year war with the Germans, and yet were willing to bring Germans back into our country as immigrants to work after they had been POWs and to integrate them into our society. I mean, a lot of countries are historically, xenophobic and, very, people don't realize, people complain about, American immigration laws and things like that. The immigration laws in place like Japan and Russia and Mexico and most of the world is extremely xenophobic. They don't allow, it's very difficult for foreign workers to come in their country and get a job. And to not only allow that to happen after World War II, but to have your enemy, your recent enemy be able to come back and be a part of that, I think I think it's really cool. And in fact, we're going to play, I think these next two clips back to back, Ryan. It's about him coming to America, getting a job, and kind of landing to where he is right now, about what that path looked like to be an immigrant.
Well, when you ended up immigrating over here in '53,
Yeah.
is that right? What did you end up doing over here? I mean,
Well, I looked for a job, and what happened? You'll laugh. I bet. I have to tell you, it's a very short story.
oh, go ahead.
I looked up in the paper. They were looking. Some company was looking for a clerk. Now I thought I know a little English. I can do that. Good, and I was told to come for an interview. And the interview got fine ahead, all my personalities first, and then I was asked, what do you prefer, blonde, brunette, brown? My sister was with me, and she said, no, we are here for a job, interviewing for a job. The gentleman said, no, this is a Lonely Heart Club.
Instead of going to Fourth
Then
Avenue with
I mixed up 44th Street
with the
with
avenue.
44th Avenue.
Went to the wrong
An
place.
extra
Yeah.
phone call, and I got the right place.
Yeah.
And I was the 13th to be interviewed,
Yeah.
and I had to start immediately.
That's great. That's great. So you guys were living in New York then?
Yeah.
Okay.
New York
And
City. And by the way, he had that job. I mean, not the same work. He, the same
was-
company till he retired when he was 75.
and what company was this?
Like it.
No kidding.
Yeah, US Lights USA.
Really?
Yeah, and that happened to be a German company.
Hmm.
So I had the opportunity to write, to correspond in two languages, bilingual. And I was 31 years with the company. It was the only one company I worked for.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Was it, how did you end up here in Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Well, here again,
We
my
Yeah.
sister moved to Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and I was alone
Mm-hmm.
in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So after we
Retired?
after we retired,
Mm-hmm.
we moved to
Moved here.
Michigan.
Yeah. And
And that was 1992.
What made him decide to move to Michigan? They just decided to move on the. I mean, did they have a?
Yeah. So Barb his sister doesn't talk about why she moved to Michigan, but while he was in New York working for the only company, the only place he interviewed at USA Lighting and worked there 31 years, never had another job in the United States. Talk about the American dream back then, right?
Right.
I mean, rolled in here. It ended up being a German American company. They were able to use his bilingualism.
Sorry,
He
what was
stays
the
there.
company name again?
Lighting USA,
Lighting USA, but it was a German company.
a German American company. I know.
Okay.
It's just wild. And he stays in New York and he works there for 31 years. And then in 1992, he would end up going to Comstock Park, Michigan, is actually where it was. And I would end up interviewing him. I think it was in 2006. So he had been there for a little while. It was really cool to see that he was able to come to America and basically interview and get a job right away. After, of course, he did the fool in the rain moment and went to the wrong block, went to the wrong avenue instead of street or vice versa, and thought he was in one of those Lonely Hearts clubs. They were trying to set him up with a date, and he was just trying to find a job. But just wild how you meet people. And then I would end up meeting him through my sister who worked at Red Lobster at the time, and I'm sitting at his house.
He had it all backwards. He needed to get the job so he could pay for the date later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. You can't just roll in there as some
Right.
broke,
Yeah.
jobless, barely
Right.
speaking English German guy, and then get some. Yeah. But this is, you could say that this would be the end of the interview. We've taken everything from, growing up in Czechoslovakia and being sucked up in the war, and then being a POW and coming back. But we've got another several clips here, because as what often happens in these interviews is people start, I'll ask questions about things that it's like,
Sure.
I want them to cover this in more detail. And his sister Barbara will speak in. Now, you got to remember, during this entire time that he's a POW, she's a civilian in the German Czech Republic, and she's experiencing things in a very similar way that Marta Warner experienced things as a civilian. So now, if you thought that, the part of the interview where all this dynamic stuff was happening in the world at the time is over, you're sorely wrong. Let's go through some of these clips, Ryan. The first one is he's going to talk a bit about the difference in the armies that he experienced, whether it's Czechoslovakia and Germany.
when you were accepted into the German army, did you have to go through basic training again?
No,
Okay, because you were already a soldier. You were assigned to a unit.
that's correct, yeah.
So what was the difference, in your opinion, between the Czechoslovakian army and the German army? I mean, how did they differ? How were they the same?
Well, in the Czech army, I was for the artillery. I had my horse, and I was assigned to a group, and it happened to be, there were four groups, four cannons. Okay? There was one group with all Germans. Then there were two more groups, only Czechs, and then one mixed, and others, I don't know.
Hungarians, Serbians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and on the group, all Czechs, and I was the only German. Well, I had some nice experience too. For instance, the things came, the colonel in the Czech army, and he asked all the parts of the cannon, and everybody just couldn't say much about it. And then I was the last one, and the only German, and I could rattle down every part and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that left a positive impression on him, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
What about the difference in discipline and organization and training between the Czechoslovakian army and the German army? Did you see much difference there?
Well, the Czech army, it was quite disciplined. We had our horses. We had daily duty, and we had to take care the horse and ourselves.
What about in the German army? How did that differ?
Well, in the German army, first of all, to me, it started only with walking, and then we go in a wartime, and in the wartime you are not that strict with training and marching and like that. It was a little bit, in a way, freer.
I always wondered about that. We've heard a lot of our people we've interviewed who are in the United States military saying, once they were out in the front, once you're in the military, all the spit and polish stuff went away. And in fact, when you did that, it was called chicken shit. And it sounds like that was pretty universal with some of the German army as well. And I want to add something about the Czech army really quick. When the Germans took over the Sudatenland, then ultimately Czechoslovakia, they inherited a relatively large modern military. The Bren machine gun that the British would use, that was their version of the BAR, but I would say it was better because it was magazine fed, was actually developed in Czechoslovakia. The tanks that the Czechs had at this point in the war were in many cases better armed than what the Germans had, and they were used whole cloth by the Germans as they invaded Russia and France. In fact, there was an interesting thing that no, that was a French tank. I'm sorry, I was thinking of a crossroads battlefield we went to where a foreign tank was used by the German military, but that was a French tank. The bottom line is the Czechoslovakian army was and the military industry that they had there was a prized possession for the Germans. But you also heard Barb say that there are other nationalities in the military, and this was the weakness. This is why they went away. You had Serbs, you had Croats, you had Polish, you had Hungarians, you had Czechs, and you had Germans. And one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize is when the Germans annexed Czechoslovakia, they didn't annex all of it because their neighbors took pieces of it as well. The Poles took a piece, the Hungarians took a piece. There was that's the problem with trying to constitute a country using just boundaries on a map that the victors put together after World War I. The same thing would happen in the Middle East. You get these different nationalities, different tribes, and they kind of still want to be a part of that tribe, whether they're assigned to a new country or not. And that can really affect the efficacy of your military when you got a bunch of guys on a single battery, and half of them don't speak German and the other half don't speak Czech. And that's what he was saying was happening to him when he was on the Czech army side.
So let me ask you, you mentioned the Bren, the Bren gun. What was the one that was the British gun that was so unreliable?
The Sten?
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
The STEN? Yeah, the Sten gun.
There was one that they used on Pegasus Bridge that they'd try to use it to fire, and it would always misfire all the time. That was
their sheet metal 9mm submachine gun. So the British will take different arsenals that make a gun, and that's what they'll name it. So I think Bren stands for the BRNO arsenal in Czechoslovakia, and then the Enfield arsenal, so Bren. And then the Sten, I think, is the Sterling Enfield arsenals made the Sten gun. So the smelly, the short magazine Lee Enfield, all these initialisms. But the Czech had a modern, effective arms industry. They still do today. And they were quite the prize. I would say probably the biggest prize that Germany got when they entered Czechoslovakia and took it over, because not only did they take over a country that had a bunch of Czechoslovakians who were well armed, but they also took away in those border regions, the Sudatenland, those mountainous areas where fortifications were being built to stop a German invasion of Czechoslovakia. So when Neville Chamberlain and Dallier, however you pronounce the French prime minister's name, gave Germany the right to take over the Sudetenland, they basically doomed Czechoslovakia. They could no longer defend themselves. So, at any rate, I just wanted to hear him talk about. Here's a guy that was in two different armies. What was the difference between the two? And it was really interesting. He's talking about horses, right? That's kind of
Right.
we're into a
That's
lot of US
cavalry
soldiers.
stuff, man. You know,
Totally. You
Yeah.
know, shining your boots.
Yep.
Okay, so the next clip is, he was part of the occupying force in France, and I wanted to know a little bit more about how the locals treated him, and that's what this clip is.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned that you basically walked across Belgium and France.
Yeah.
Was this during the German attack on France, or were you there after all that occurred?
No, that was after.
Okay.
We were there as occupation.
Could you describe what the relationship was like between the German army and the people like in Belgium and France as an member of the occupation force?
Yeah. Oh yes, in Belgium we had not much. We only walked through. Right? But then in France, we were very good friends with the French people. We could go out. We could go out for dinner if you wanted to, any place.
So there wasn't a lot of animosity that you experienced. Did everyone just kind of got along okay?
I think, I think everybody. People who took care. We had some people who worked in our camp. See? They were French people. There were some love episodes too, right? For instance, one of the other men in the office, his girlfriend, he had a girlfriend. She was pregnant, see? And so we had a very good relationship.
Obviously.
Yeah. But then when we were picked up by the English, then the French threw stones at us.
Did they? So you witnessed some of that retribution as a POW then going through.
Yeah.
Everything was great until they had to surrender and English came, and then they threw rocks at them. You went from having babies with the French women to having them throw rocks at you. We've heard this before, haven't we?
Well, he mentioned that, things were great. We all seem to get along. I'm like, really?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I remember seeing newsreel footage of the French as the Germans rolled through their town, the French crying, but saluting, so I don't know how if that was, I guess, a real emotions that he was experiencing.
I couldn't agree more. It felt like there was probably a lot of opportunism for people to be able to cozy up to the people who had the food, who had the jobs, who had the money, which would have been the German occupying force. And of course, the love interest things are in every single war, whether you want to believe they happen or not. But to me, the real prize nugget from that was when he said, when the English came, when we surrendered, they threw stones at us. I was like, that sounds more like probably how they felt about things in the overall thing. So now Barbara, his sister, was in Czechoslovakia and southern Germany during all of this. And she's going to talk a little bit about what it was like to be there during the war.
What about, and Barb, maybe you can kind of, what about the Allied bombing effort? Did you experience getting bombed pretty free? Did you? Where were you living when the Allies bombed the area you were in?
I was living near Carlsbad, Karlovy, as it is known now.
Okay. Do you mind if I turn the camera to show you, or does that bother you?
I take very bad pictures.
Okay, I'll leave it off then.
The bombing was there.
So what would you do during a bombing raid?
Go to the cell.
Did any of the bombs that were dropped get close to your place where you were?
I was working, yes. Not where I was living. So.
How badly damaged was the town? How often was it bombed? Was it bombed many times, or just?
It was toward the end of the war, as I remember correctly. It was bombed quite a bit. The train stations, the trains, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And but we could hear actually when the bombs fell in Dresden. which was very heavily bombed.
It was firebombed.
Well, when Nuremberg was bombed, then the windows would shake
Really?
in our home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how old would you have been around this time?
About 1920.
Really?
18, 19, 20 years.
So is that, I mean, did you feel kind of helpless in that sense? I mean, you're a civilian, you're on the ground. I mean, how did you guys get through that?
I only felt helpless once when I was at the bus station with my little niece, and planes came flying low and shattered us. And that was rather
So these would have been probably American and British fighters?
not nice, yes.
No.
No.
What about at Le Havre? Was there an Allied bombing raids on Le Havre when you were there?
Next to us, there was a,
Anti-aircraft battery?
yeah,
Black Tower.
and they were completely demolished.
Really?
There was only left one person, and he was in our bunkers.
Really?
When the things came, the attack, he came running, and he was in our office. Then when he went out and looked, he said nobody is left.
Really?
Yeah.
Did-
Well, we were in bunkers, and nothing happened to us. And right next to, they were completely
Yeah.
wiped out.
Okay. So you guys had shelter, but those
Oh, yeah.
those who didn't were.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
were in bunkers, in heavy bunkers.
What? How often was the area that you were in near Le Havre? How often was that bombed? Was it bombed pretty frequently?
No, that was the only time
That was one time.
where it was close.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we heard, there was bombing. It was obviously, and we were surrounded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was one little town. These people, there were only French people. Yeah, none of us. And that town was completely demolished. We did not know why.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
but war is war. What can you do?
Yeah. So you heard Barb earlier. So Dresden was right across the border from Czechoslovakia, from where they were staying in Carlsbad. And she said that the windows in their houses in Czechoslovakia would shake when Dresden was being bombed, like 50 miles away, maybe 25 miles away. Close, but not that close.
Right.
Right. Enough that it really gives
Well,
some insight about the violence of these bombing raids, that you could feel it across the border many miles away. You couldn't even see the city necessarily, but you could feel the bombs like an earthquake going off. And Nuremberg, she said the same thing.
Julius talks about, you ask him about whether he experienced anything in Le Havre,
Yeah.
and on September 10th, there was a massive RAF bombing.
And
mission.
that was the start of Operation Estonia.
Correct.
Yep. So please
And
continue.
It says that over 4,700 tons of bombs fell on Le Havre in just a few hours.
Oh my God.
So what he experienced was a very intense bombing raid.
Wow.
But anyway, I just wanted to kind of point that out. He actually touches on whether he experienced anything like that, and he did. He mentions that it was just a one time. He said it was just one time. Well, that was it. And
Yeah, and he said that there were men that were in the flak tower not too far from them, and they targeted that, and none of them survived. All of them died.
Except one who was in the bunker with them.
Yeah, exactly. Except for the one who could tell them that they're all dead now. And everything I read about Operation Estonia is that the combined arms part of it, the British Navy, the British and American bombers and fighter bombers, and all of the specialized armor just did a masterful job of very quickly overtaking Le Havre. And I thought what he was going to tell me was, we got bombed all the time. I wonder if part of the plan of the deception was to not bomb those areas. I don't know why he wouldn't have experienced more bombing campaigns from the Allies. They knew the Atlantic Wall was there. That's a mystery to me.
Mm-hmm.
If any one of our, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to talk a little bit about Dresden.
Yeah.
You know, that she mentioned Dresden and everything. And, um, as we, if anybody's, knows anything about this part of the bombing campaign, the Allied bombing campaign, Dresden's a very controversial topic because it was, essentially called a firebombing campaign, much like we were doing over in Tokyo and in Japan. But it was February 45 when the bombing of Dresden really started, that the infamous part of the bombing of Dresden came about. But there were, is RAF day and night. Sorry, the RAF bombed at night. We bombed during the day. The Americans did. And it says here, reading from a common source, and it says that 3,900 tons of bombs were dropped over 3 raids in 2 days. Okay, think about that. Julius just went through 4,700 tons of bombs in a few hours.
Yeah.
And now they used high explosives on the Dresden raid. But the combination of high explosive bombs, which were made to blow open buildings, followed by the waves of incendiaries, created this massive firestorm that consumed 6 square miles of the city center, and temperatures inside the firestorm reached up to 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Red lava that comes out of Kilauea volcano is 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hotter than that.
This would melt rock.
I mean, nothing would survive that. It would just be, anyway, the casualties for Dresden, a modern scholarly consensus is anywhere from, now I don't know, this seems odd, 22,000 to 25,000. However, early Soviet and East German claims were between 1945 and 1950 said 200 to 300,000, but they think that was greatly exaggerated for propaganda against the British and the US, at that time. West German post-war estimates were anywhere between 35 and 135,000. So regardless, it's an amazingly tragic number of people died. And it's not something that we really revel in.
No.
War is hell,
No.
I mean, and this was, again, a very controversial thing that follows, the Allies' war effort decision-making to this day.
And while you were doing that, I just looked it up. As the crow flies, the distance from Dresden to Carlsbad is 75 miles. So that meant the windows in her house was shaking from our bombs falling on a city 75 miles away.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Listener, think of the town that you know of right now where you live, 75 miles away. And think about being able to hear bombs, the bombs falling there, rattling your windows. I can't fathom that.
I can't. I literally cannot imagine that. I can't. And we were doing that every day and every night for 3.5 years.
It's amazing that continent is what it is today. How it all withstood it's withstood all of this, all these battles over the centuries, the world wars, and it's rebuilt itself. The people have come together, rebuilt itself. They're proud of their culture, and they should. It's the jewel of the world. I think Western Europe in general, it's just an amazingly fascinating place, obviously with so much rich culture. So
and most of it's because they were able to survive all the issues that they had with each other and themselves and whatnot. And okay, at any rate, that left an impression on me. So the next clip is going to talk about how they got their butts kicked out of Czechoslovakia after the war.
Yeah, there's one thing we left out.
Yes.
After the war, all German-speaking people had to leave Czechoslovakia, leave house and everything, and you went out mostly to Germany with nothing. Start again.
Is that what happened to your family?
Mhm.
So you guys were forced out of Czechoslovakia. Is that where you ended up in Munich?
Yes.
Interesting.
I was then still in a prisoner of war.
Yes.
I only found out when I came home.
Yeah. So the reason he went to Munich after spending 1.5 years in England being denazified is because they couldn't go back home again. So here's something I did not know. Just a couple quick paragraphs here. In the summer of 1945, so after the war, at the Potsdam Conference, it was decided that the Sudeten Germans, which is what he was, would have to leave Czechoslovakia. As a consequence of the intense hostility against all Germans that had grown within Czechoslovakia because many of them had helped the Nazis, the overwhelming majority of Germans were expelled through the relevant Czechoslovakian legislation had provided for Germans to remain if they could prove their not anti-Nazi affiliation. So the Czechoslovakian government in exile, not the ones that were occupied, passed a series of resolutions during the war that culminated in the Potsdam Conference decision after the war that the Germans had to go. And the numbers were thus. The number of expelled Germans in the early phase, the spring of summer of 45, was estimated to be around 500,000 people. After the Beneš Decree, you heard Beneš before, he was a prime minister of Czechoslovakia when the Munich Agreement occurred. And they wanted, the Western powers wanted to give him the Nobel Peace Prize because basically he let that happen and it wasn't his fault. Beneš had no choice but to accept those terms. And the only reason they want to give him a peace prize is because he ate one for the Allies, not because he did the right thing. Well, now he's back in power and he's pissed off and he's going to run off some Germans. So after the Beneš decrees, nearly all Germans were expelled starting in 1946. And in 1950, only 159,938 from the pre-war population of 3.15 million Sudeten Germans were left in Czechoslovakia. They're the only ones who were deemed
What's that number again? How many? What was it?
So pre-war, you had basically 3.1 million Germans. Right. By 1950, there was 160,000 left. Oh, it gets better. In 2021, in that census, 24,000 people in the Czech Republic claimed German ethnicity, out of which 15,000 of those combined with other ethnicities. The Germans have been run out of Czechoslovakia in their hometown of Horecní. I think I pronounced that right. In pre-war, there was 2,600 people in their hometown. 1930 census. In 1950, there was 1,300. 50% of the people in that town were gone, run off. And you have to imagine this happening in every town and village and hamlet all around the Sudatenland. So there were significant consequences for the Sudeten Germans. Some maybe deserved, some, I'm sure it's documented, supported the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, and some not deserved. Mostly from my reading, middle-class Czechoslovakians generally didn't align with the Nazi party, felt like it wasn't good for Czechoslovakia, and were quite content to be Czechoslovakian. That was the group that that Julius and Barbara were a part of. So after the war, there were diasporas everywhere. The Jews were going back to Palestine. You had Japanese being moved off islands and other places and going back to their homeland. And then in Germany or in Europe, you had this and many other displaced persons moving all over Europe. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't realize that Czechoslovakia had a deliberate purge of Germans after World War II.
I didn't either. And I'm happy to say, Tony, I think if we learned anything out of this series, we found an ethnic, dialect that fits well with your Michigan palate, because you pronounce that town very well. It seemed to roll right off your tongue. So I think there must be a link there, ethnically there for you, that you need to explore.
Raznietit. That's where they're from.
Wow.
I can't pronounce a single French word, but I got this crazy ass Czech word with a bunch of Z's in it. I'm fine with that. I don't know what's going on. So, okay, we got a few more clips.
Okay.
This next one is basically this. Just play it. This is so different from any time we've asked an American this.
Was there a point in time when you had a feeling that maybe Germany wouldn't win this war?
Yeah, right in the beginning.
Right in the beginning. Wow. So you knew right away. Did you feel the same way?
Yes.
And why did you feel that way?
No, because it was very obvious.
Yeah.
And
As soon as America started in on it,
You just thought there was just too many enemies.
The
basically.
invasion,
Yeah.
you knew. that
So for you, it was the invasion.
just
you knew.
just no, there's just no way,
Yeah.
you know.
And Barb, you were before the invasion. You were even had some doubts. It sounded like.
yes,
Hmm.
yes, yeah.
Wow, that's really an interesting. That's a definite, change of pace for us.
Yeah, every American GI we've interviewed, if we asked them if they thought that we'd win World War II, oh yeah, we knew at the beginning we would win, and we just heard these people from Czechoslovakia and Sudatenland German say we knew right at the beginning we would lose. The complete antithesis, and yet
That's pretty crazy.
And yet we fought a 4-year war where tens of millions of people died when anyone with half a brain already knew what the outcome would be.
Mm-hmm.
What an idiotic thing we did.
Yep. Everybody else could see it, but not the high command, not the belligerents there.
So as neurotic as you are about submarines, I think our audience knows by now that I'm neurotic about Russians. I've never have a nice thing to say about the Russian military. And guess what?
This guy named Putin stopped by my house after you left the other day. You might watch your back, buddy.
Well, yeah, fortunately we're more incorporated in your address than mine, so they won't find me right away. But guess what?
Oh my gosh.
On this next clip, it's about Russians. Let's go ahead and play it.
My sister and I, we didn't really sleep in our bed. I bed for about 6 weeks.
Really?
And we were hiding either someplace. It wasn't the most pleasant time. We were hiding. We had a castle.
Mhm.
So we were hiding in the castle. They had a room for us and put a big buffet in front of the door. The Russians came. The first troops always were bad. Once the occupation came, it wasn't that bad anymore. But they took just about whatever they liked, including handkerchiefs, because they never knew what a handkerchief was, obviously. It was just the little things,
Yes.
Once the occupation came, they kept the soldiers under control. And then, of course, we were young girls, we were afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we had the Russian occupation was there even when we left. My sister and I and my sister-in-law, we went to Germany across the border before our parents did. They took a guide for us to take us across. Which didn't work out too well because they stopped us at the border and took everything we had.
So they were actually Eastern German. I mean, they were on the Soviet Union side of the occupation of Europe at that point, right?
Correct. And they went into what would have been southeastern Germany, and they had a quote unquote guide and lost everything they had. I mean, Marta talks about as a German, losing everything, knowing that they would, burying what they had in Silesia in their backyard, which is still buried back there somewhere. There's probably stuff buried all over that continent.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Because of all these displaced persons, something that most Americans have never had to deal with and don't even understand. So at any rate, just another thing. I mean, and again, the Russians were horribly poor at that time. Things like a handkerchief was a big deal to them. And of course, there's other things that was taken that I'm sure she didn't want to talk about. Let's play the last 3 clips back to back because they're a little bit of everything. We're going to talk about immigration, about a little more pain about being expelled, and then wrap up with her brother being killed by the Russians.
Was their immigration policy pretty liberal? They allowed a lot of people from Germany into
No,
America?
No, it was very hard.
Really?
Very hard, yes.
So what do you think allowed you guys to be some of the families that were able to make it over there?
And I had trouble myself because in things when it used to be Czechoslovakia, we had there was a light athletic club, Turnverein we called it. No? For a time, I was the leader of it. I think about for a year or a little more. Like it is something political, see? And I was the leader of that. So there was a big problem.
So it's kind of a black mark on your record as they saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See?
Okay.
And I made it clear, it has nothing to do with the party,
Okay.
Oh, there was one thing,
Very
he was an ambassador in New York from here. And my sister knew him too, and he wrote a very strong letter to the ambassador in Munich, why I could not get the visa. And that was the holdup.
There was never any animosity as far as not liking these people. And I think it really hurt what they did to us after the war. Because you just lost everything. And not just a property or anything. There were much deeper things which you lost. And as far as war is concerned, it's war. I mean, that doesn't mean that you hate any other nationality, at least not as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, we'll save the last clip, but these first two clips, the first one, basically Julius was part of something like it wasn't the Hitler Youth, it was like the Boy Scouts. It was a club that went out hiking and camping and was associated with those sorts of activities. And the problem he had with getting United States, even though his sister was already there and apparently had some ties to the ambassador, which is pretty amazing, was because of that group that he was a part of, and he was the leader of that group. So they thought he was a Nazi. They thought he was some sort of fascist. And it took them a while for them to convince the powers that be that, look, it wasn't that at all. And as Ryan and I have talked about in our Martha Warner series, even if it were, a lot of these groups like the Hitler Youth were things that were a lot of people kind of had to join to go to get along, to be able to get your ration cards and housing and the benefits. You kind of had to be a part of these things. So it might have been that as well.
It really wasn't a choice.
Yeah,
really
right.
Wasn't.
Totally. I mean, according to Marta and the research we did independently, the vast majority of people that were part of these groups kind of felt pressured or kind of had to do it. They were anchored by a group of people who absolutely believed in all that stuff. But when you went to one of these meetings, it was a pretty mixed group. And then the second clip, the pain from being expelled from Czechoslovakia, I thought what Barb said was really impressive. She said, we lost a lot by being expelled, and it wasn't just our things. They were integrating into the Czechoslovakian culture. I just read the thing that between 1930 and 1950, half of their village was gone. Well, the other half was still there, and they knew those people. And they felt betrayed by that. They felt like they were targeted. They felt like they were stereotyped by it. So that's something else that I think most of our audience, I know I certainly don't understand it, is what it's like to be ostracized.
Right.
Most of us, thank God, don't know what that means, but they were ostracized, and it was painful for them. And in fact, you going back to the time of antiquity with the Greeks and the Romans, and one of the worst punishments you could give a high-ranking member in society was to be ostracized, was to be separated from their tribe. And that's what happened to them. And I thought
To be exiled, kind of like Napoleon was. right?
Exactly. That's the same thing as being ostracized, exiled.
Mhm.
They're basically the same thing. Now we're on to our last clip. And this last clip was mind-blowing to me. This interview's going along and I'm learning a lot. And then they never speak about their brother until now. And it's like, holy crap. But go ahead and play it.
First of all, it was meant to that the Americans come in and occupy the area where the German people were living.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly it was changed, and the Russians came. And my brother came, and he only said to some people, the Americans are coming. Don't worry, the Americans are coming.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, it wasn't long, they picked him up and they killed him.
Really?
Yes. After,
Who is they? Who killed him?
well,
Was it the secret police, the Russians?
we actually don't really know.
Okay.
I only know after they put them through a lot of pain and stuff, a Russian officer came and gave him a neck shot.
Really?
Yeah. There was one witness from our hometown. He was also in jail there. Yeah? And he saw the whole thing. And they asked my brother why and why, and he did not answer. He just didn't say anything. And they wanted to just get something out of him, and he didn't say anything. And when my father came, they told him he's cold already.
Really?
See? So at that time, my father was from black hair, overnight white hair.
Ah,
Just so I'm clear, what sort of information were they trying to get out of your brother?
He thought he was a spy. He put him down as American spy because he's.
That's what they told my dad.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's what they told me.
he said the Americans are coming. Like, where does he know it from? No?
I see.
See?
Got it. Wow.
mm.
And so they imprisoned him and he died in jail
Yeah.
over that.
He was just, they picked him
He
up on
just
the
was-
same day. As a matter of fact, they killed 7 people that night.
I guess
But
you
of course, that is not documented,
So this is something.
because they did not document stuff like that.
This is something I didn't want even to touch, but since you asked,
yes.
and this.
Was this work carried out through the existing Czechoslovakian security forces at the time?
Could be the communists.
Yeah.
We don't know actually. We know that a Russian officer. We know that a Russian officer get him out of his misery and shot him.
What year was that? Did you know about when this was? This was after the war,
Yeah,
obviously.
it had been either summer of 45, late 1945. Yeah. And so basically the question I asked was there anything else that we haven't discussed yet in this interview? And you and I have asked that question very frequently when we have an interview. And then he dropped his bomb on me. And basically what happened, because there's a little more dialogue before that, but you couldn't hear Barb very well, so I cut it out. By him, first the Americans occupied part of the area they were in, and then through various agreements, the Russians took over. And when the Russians were coming in, he was saying, well, don't worry, the Americans are going to come back. The Americans will come here. And the Russians mistook that as, well, he must be working for the Americans. He must be an American spy. And it just goes to show you how quickly the world went from, oh, yeah, we're allied with the Russians to not allied with them. It happened immediately, like right away.
Right.
The Cold War didn't start in 1960 or the Bay of Pigs. It started in May 10th, 1945.
I would agree with that. That's
Right?
a great point. Yeah.
And so the bottom line is his brother got caught in this idea. And so by trying to make him confess that he was an American spy, which he would not do because he was not, they beat him, they tortured him, and then finally they shot him.
Well, okay. And what would they do if they had coerced some sort of confession out of
They would have beat him and they tortured him. They would have shot him.
him? Right.
Right.
So
I mean,
obviously Julius was still in the US, making his way back to Europe during this time that his brother was killed.
only one that bore witness to this was Barbara, because she was living there with her dad, because this is before that they were forcibly evicted. They were ostracized from Czechoslovakia before they went to Munich. Then Munich is where they would be in 1948, 47, when Julius would make it back to continental Europe. So I mean, and I guess what's interesting is, here's a family. I mean, if something like that happened in a typical American family, it would be this traumatic thing that you carry with them. People would probably know about it. But during World War II, and you heard Marta do that too with her dad, who was missing for much of the war. He had to walk back from Eastern Germany into where they were in Frankfurt. So many of these families just suffered just deaths like this, just completely unnecessary acts of violence that were still occurring well after the war ended, not just during the war. They lost a third of their family over something stupid like an occupying force thinking he was an American spy. And who would have cared about that? Right? Weren't the Americans their allies?
Yeah.
I mean, goodness. But that's just not how it was.
I mean, what a crazy time. What an amazingly confusing, crazy, treacherous time to live in. I mean, my goodness. I'm surprised really as many people survived as they actually did.
With all the people that died, it's like I can't believe that anyone survived the stupidity, the prolonged and pervasive stupidity of any war, and that one in particular, because the whole reasons why we fought it and how long it lasted when it didn't need to. People that were living in and around Germany from the start of the war, many of them were like, we're not gonna win this. This is dumb. We shouldn't have even done it. And as we talked about in a previous episode, for most Americans who may not remember this, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor against the United States, and of course we declared war on Japan. I mean, Germany declared war on us.
Right.
So they declared war on us. They brought the Americans into a war that they were not a part of, which is something that makes it even that much more stupid.
Yeah. Well, Tony, this has been a topic I had very little knowledge on, and this has been such an illuminating story and really a masterclass from you on bringing all this information to us to help us kind of understand this odyssey that he went on. And what a great interview. I mean, do we have any more in our archives like this?
We do have Johannes Grue, who was a German, who was a medic who fought for the Wehrmacht during World War II. And we'll dust that off. He had a chance to be a part of the battle of not Stalingrad, but Leningrad. We will dust that off and get that in front of people as well. But if our audience was hoping to hear about, close quarters combat and that sort of thing with this particular interview, you'll be disappointed. But I thought what was really powerful, and the reason that I wanted to feature it now, is I wanted to give our audience a taste of a different perspective of how World War II started and how these countries who were originally peripherally associated with the war before they were annexed got sucked into it, got pulled into it, and also how different it was for a German soldier to be a POW, and how disruptive post-war World War II was, because the entire continent from, Italy to England and from, France to Moscow was undergoing, people were being displaced and moved around everywhere.
Yeah.
Imagine audience, if let's say you're 48 years old and you got 3 kids at home, and you've got a house and you've got some savings and you're thinking already about maybe your kids getting out of high school and retirement. Imagine everything being taken away from you when you're 45, 50 years old, all of it. And you lose one of your kids in a war. and another one gets executed by some occupying force, and your house is burned down, and you don't have a cent to your name. Everything
And you're told to
gone.
leave. You're told you're pushed out.
You're
Told
pushed
to
out
get out of
and
the country.
move somewhere else, and then you have to start all over again just to feed yourself, just to get clothes on your back, let alone getting a home and enough money to be able to retire in dignity. So this is what the Europeans and most of Asia had to do after World War II. Anything they had that would allow them to survive, any savings they had, any home they had, was just completely gone. And they literally had to start from scratch, oftentimes from a refugee camp.
Okay. Well, hey, as always, for this going to wrap up this series. This was absolutely fantastic. Wholly educational for me, that's for sure.
And ditto for me.
Yeah. And if again, I'm just going to repeat it. If you want to hear Julius's interview without Tony and I, you can go to our YouTube channel. You can go to our website, and you can watch these interviews uncut in their entirety without me and Tony in there. But if you want the context and you want to yuck it up a bit, this is what Tony and I are here for. We're the court jesters with all this stuff. So anyway, we will wrap it up. Tony, you have anything you want to say in closing?
Nope. Other than I want to thank my sister Shelly for introducing me to us and our audience to yet another vet. She's been very supportive of what we were doing, interviewing people for Library of Congress. No one had any idea that we'd be able to share these more openly. So thank you, sis, for introducing me to Jakob and Barbara and everyone in their family. That's all I have.
All right. With that, we're going to sign off here. Please join us next time. I'm Ryan Fairfield.
And I'm Tony Lupo.
And we are the Warrior Next Door podcast.